What's up guys? Welcome to Muse Fanfiction. We've got something special today. What if Naruto was reborn as Harry's twin and his nine tails chakra made every Death Eater flee in terror? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Boy with Sun-Bright Hair. The Dursleys had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere, wasn't spoken aloud at the dinner table between mouthfuls of pot roast and Dudley's demands for a second helping. But it existed the way most unspoken rules exist in families, enforced through silence, through the particular way Petunia's mouth went thin when she was displeased, through the heaviness of Vernon's footsteps on the kitchen floor when something had irritated him at work. The system was simple: the boys in the cupboard did not exist except when they were needed, and when they were not needed, they were to be as small and as quiet and as invisible as humanly possible. Harry had learned the system early. He was good at it, actually. Good in the way that broke something quiet in the chest when you watched him, the way he moved through the house like he was apologizing for taking up space, shoulders slightly forward, eyes tracking Vernon the way a small animal tracks something larger and hungrier. He'd learned to read the weather of the Dursley household by the time he was 4. Loud television meant Vernon was content. Silence from the kitchen meant Petunia was building toward something. Dudley's laughter meant someone was about to be miserable, and that someone was almost always Harry. Naruto had never learned the system. Not for lack of trying on Petunia's part. She tried sharp words, tried cold silences, tried sending him to the cupboard for days at a stretch with nothing but bread and water. None of it worked. The boys simply looked at her with those impossibly blue eyes, a color that had no business existing in this family, a color like deep water and summer sky pressed together, and absorbed her punishment the way a stone absorbs rain. Unaffected. Waiting it out. And then, the moment the cupboard door opened, he was loud and bright and entirely himself again. He was also, Petunia had noted with private horror, golden. Not in a normal way. Harry had James Potter's dark, untamable hair. Naruto had come out of that car on that terrible November night with a head full of hair the color of actual sunlight, not blonde, not fair, but yellow, vivid and impractical, sticking out in every direction no matter what she tried. She'd once taken scissors to it in a fit of desperation and it had grown back overnight. She didn't try again. The whiskers were worse. 3 lines on each cheek, thin as claw marks, the same color as his skin but slightly raised, visible in certain lights. She'd taken him to a doctor when he was 2. The doctor had looked at them for a long time, said they appeared to be a birthmark, and offered no further explanation. Petunia had nodded and taken the boys home and never mentioned it again. Vernon occasionally looked at the marks the way he looked at things he couldn't categorize, with a sort of baffled, offended suspicion, as though Naruto had grown them specifically to inconvenience him. The boys shared the cupboard under the stairs. This had not been the plan. Petunia had intended to put them both in there but separately, 2 small people taking up even less space, but Naruto had simply refused to sleep unless Harry was next to him. 4 years old, arms folded, planted in the middle of the cupboard floor with the specific immovability of someone who has decided they are not moving and means it absolutely. Petunia had stared at him. He had stared back. She had eventually shut the door and gone to bed, and in the morning both boys were asleep on the narrow cot together, Harry curled against Naruto's side, and Naruto sprawled flat on his back with one arm thrown over his twin like he was holding something precious in place. That was the other thing about Naruto. He had, from the very beginning, treated Harry like the most important person in any room. Not with words, not at first, they were small children and the words came slowly. But in the way he moved, the way he positioned himself. At meals, he sat between Dudley and Harry. At the park, he stayed close enough to Harry that Dudley's gang had to get through him first, and getting through Naruto was not a simple thing. He fell down and got back up at a rate that disturbed children twice his size. He didn't fight back with particular skill. He was 6, 7, 8 years old, no training, no technique, but he had a quality that was harder to define and considerably more effective. He simply did not stop. Dudley's gang, by the time they were 8, had developed a habit of leaving Harry alone when Naruto was present. It wasn't that Naruto ever won, exactly. It was that hurting him didn't seem to do what hurting was supposed to do. He'd stand up from a shove with a grin that had too much sunshine in it, spit blood if his lip was split, and say something like, "Nice one. Try the left this time." Like it was a game he was enjoying. Like he was keeping score and the score wasn't pain-related. The Dursleys had, by the time the boys were 9, essentially given up on breaking Naruto and focused their considerable energy on simply managing him. He ate enormous amounts of food, double Harry's portion, sometimes triple, and still stayed lean and energetic in a way that baffled Petunia, who believed firmly that the body's fuel intake should reflect in the body's appearance. He slept heavily but woke instantly, fully alert before his eyes were fully open, which had startled Vernon so badly one morning that he dropped his coffee mug. He healed from cuts and bruises faster than was strictly normal, something Petunia had noted and filed away in the part of her mind where she kept things she didn't want to examine closely. The magic thing, well. They'd always known it was coming. Petunia had known since that night Hagrid set the boys on her doorstep, Harry asleep and Naruto wide awake and staring at the world with those water-blue eyes like he was taking notes. She'd read Lily's letter with Vernon standing over her shoulder and she'd thought, 2 of them. There are 2 of them. And she'd brought them inside because she didn't have a choice, not really, not with Dumbledore's name at the bottom of that letter like a promise of consequences. Harry's magic showed up sideways, accidental, reactive, driven by emotion. He'd once ended up on the school roof when fleeing Dudley, which Vernon had punished him for as though the roof had been his intended destination. He grew his hair back. He made glass disappear at the zoo, which had caused a scene Petunia still occasionally dreamed about. Naruto's magic showed up like Naruto showed up, directly, confidently, and with absolutely no concern for social convention. He'd been 10 years old. Vernon had come into the kitchen in one of his rages, a bad day at work, a complaint from a neighbor, something that had wound him tight enough to snap. Harry had been at the counter, washing up, and Naruto had been at the kitchen table eating the last of the bread they were allowed and probably contemplating eating the furniture next. Vernon's voice had gone to that particular register, the low, thunderous one that preceded the belt coming off, and he'd grabbed Harry's arm and yanked, and something in Naruto had simply gone still. Not frightened still. Not the stillness of someone calculating escape routes. The stillness of something enormous waking up. The temperature in the kitchen dropped. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just enough that Petunia, standing by the stove, suddenly felt it on her bare arms and looked up from the pot she'd been stirring. The light in the overhead fixture flickered once, twice, then held. Vernon, mid-shout, stopped. He looked at Naruto and whatever he saw on the boy's face made his own face do something complicated, a kind of involuntary recoil, the flinch of someone who has startled a thing they thought was harmless and suddenly understands they were wrong. Naruto had stood up from the table. Not fast, not threatening in any specific way. He just stood, and looked at Vernon, and said in a voice that was 10 years old and also somehow nothing like a 10-year-old's, "Don't." Vernon's grip on Harry's arm loosened. Vernon would later tell himself it was his own decision, his own reasonable reassessment of the situation, that he'd let go because he chose to. But in the kitchen, in that moment, standing in the strange cool air with his sister-in-law's freakish nephew looking at him with eyes that had gone from summer sky blue to something that had faint threads of red at the edges, in that moment, Vernon Dursley had let go because something very old and very deep in his animal brain had sent up an emergency signal. Do not. Do not. Do not. Naruto had held Vernon's gaze for another 3 seconds. Then the moment passed. The temperature returned to normal. The light steadied. Naruto reached out and took Harry's wrist gently, looked at it, satisfied himself that there was no real damage, and sat back down and ate the rest of his bread. Harry stared at him. Vernon retreated to the living room. Petunia stirred her pot with hands that were not quite steady. No one said anything about it. After that, Vernon's rages had a ceiling. They could get loud, get cruel in the petty and economic ways, less food, more chores, weekends inside, but they did not become physical. Petunia thought, privately and guiltily, that this might have been the best outcome available to any of them. The summer before everything changed, Harry found a box. It was in the back of the cupboard, behind the loose board that Naruto had discovered in their first year in the house and which they used to store things they didn't want the Dursleys to find, a chocolate bar Harry had been given at school by a teacher, a small green stone Naruto had found in the garden and kept for reasons he couldn't articulate but that felt important. The box was shoebox-sized, battered, with a name on the side in faded black marker, Lily. Someone had started to write Potter underneath and stopped partway through. They sat in the cupboard with the door cracked for light, knees touching, and went through it together. Photos, mostly. Petunia had kept almost nothing of her sisters, but apparently even she hadn't been able to throw away everything. There was a photo of a red-haired woman laughing at something off camera, so alive and unaware of being watched that looking at it felt like an intrusion. A photo of the same woman with a man, dark-haired, glasses, a grin that Harry immediately recognized in the shape of his own face. A photo of the man holding two infants with the exhausted, besotted expression of someone who cannot quite believe what they've been handed, too happy to be tired. Harry looked at the photo for a long time without speaking. Naruto looked at it for a shorter time, then looked at Harry's face, and decided the photo was less important than what it was doing to his brother. "They look cool," Naruto said. Straightforward. No careful tiptoeing around the massive thing they were both looking at. "They're dead," Harry said. His voice was entirely flat, which was worse than if it had cracked. "Yeah." Naruto didn't argue with it, didn't dress it up. "They look like they were good people, though. You can tell with photos. Sad people look sad even when they're smiling. She's not sad. Neither is he." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then, how do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say the thing that's," Harry stopped. "Tried again." "You never make anything worse." Naruto blinked. Considered this as though it was a novel observation about himself. "I don't think about making things worse. I think about what I'd want someone to say if it was me." "And if it was you?" Naruto looked at the photo again. At the woman with the red hair, laughing at something they'd never know. "I'd want someone to tell me they were worth missing. That it makes sense to miss them." He handed the photo to Harry carefully, like it was a living thing. "They're worth missing." Harry put the photo in the inside pocket of his too-big jacket, the one that had been Dudley's 3 years ago and would eventually be Dudley's again when Dudley outgrew it once more in the other direction. He kept his hand over the pocket for a moment. Then he said, "I think we're going to get letters soon." Naruto had been thinking the same thing. He didn't know how he knew, fragments, really, like pieces of dreams that survived waking. A village. Orange. Ramen at midnight. Faces he couldn't quite focus on. And somewhere underneath all of that, vast and warm and grudging, something that wasn't quite words but communicated with perfect clarity, "Pay attention, Kit. Things are about to move." "Yeah," Naruto said. "I think so too." The letters arrived on Harry's birthday. Then more letters. Then an absolute avalanche of letters, stuffed through every available aperture of the house by an owl population that clearly had no concept of overkill. Vernon's response to this was first bafflement, then rage, then a kind of frantic determination, and he'd packed them all into the car at 2 in the morning with the energy of a man who believed that geography could solve a magical problem. They'd ended up in a shack on a rock in the sea. Rain. Cold. Not quite enough food. Dudley's birthday cake, which was chocolate and which Dudley ate the majority of while looking at Harry and Naruto with the expression of someone performing a dominance display for an audience that had stopped watching. At midnight, technically Harry's birthday, technically Naruto's birthday, the same date, the same year, the fact of their twinship so obvious and so entirely ignored by the Dursleys that it had long since stopped being painful and become simply the furniture of their lives. Naruto drew a 11 in the dust on the floor with his finger and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something passed between them in the look, wordless and complete. "Happy birthday, then." "Happy birthday." The door came off its hinges in a way that suggested it had been asked politely once and had declined. Hagrid was enormous. This was the first thing. The second thing was that he was the most obviously good person Naruto had seen in 10 years of living with the Dursleys, which set a low bar but which Naruto appreciated regardless. The man had a kind face under all the beard, kind hands under all the size. He handed Harry a squashed birthday cake from inside his coat and looked at both boys with an expression of enormous, complicated emotion. "Harry Potter," he said. And then, turning to Naruto with a kind of wondering delight, "And Naruto Potter. Bless me. Both, oh yeah. Here. After all this time." "That's us," Naruto said. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, spine straight, entirely calm. He'd woken up the second Hagrid's knock hit the door, fully alert before his eyes were open, and he'd watched the door come off with the mild interest of someone watching an anticipated event finally occur. "You're from the school." Hagrid blinked. "How'd you know that?" "The letters said Hogwarts. You've got an owl feather on your coat. And you're clearly not afraid of anything, which means either you're very stupid or you're very capable," and Naruto tilted his head, examining the man with the frank assessment of someone who'd learned early to read people for their threat level and their trustworthiness and very little in between. "You're not stupid." Hagrid beamed. "Smart lad." "Yes, I'm from Hogwarts. Rubius Hagrid, Keeper o' Keys." "Naruto." He offered a hand without standing up, and Hagrid shook it carefully, aware of his own size. "This is Harry. He already knows who he is, probably, but you should say it anyway. He needs to hear it from someone who actually means it." Hagrid looked at him for a moment with those kind eyes, and some understanding shifted behind them. He turned to Harry. "You're a wizard, Harry." What followed was the kind of conversation that restructured a person's entire understanding of their own life. Hagrid told them about the wizarding world, about Voldemort, about what had happened to James and Lily Potter, and through it all, Harry sat very still and Naruto sat next to him and listened with the quality of attention he gave to everything, absolute and unperformative. When Hagrid told them about the night their parents died, about Voldemort trying to kill Harry, about the lightning bolt scar, and then pausing, looking at Naruto with the slight uncertainty of someone who'd been briefed on one child and found two, Naruto said, easily, "He tried me first, actually. I think." Hagrid stared. "Beg pardon?" "The scar." Naruto touched his cheek, not a lightning bolt, not a specific shape, just those 3 lines, those 6 whisker marks. "Whatever hit Harry bounced off something. I think it hit me first and bounced off me first." This was not information Hagrid had been given. The way he went very still and very large-eyed suggested it was information that was going to cause significant administrative difficulty for someone else. I'll have to mention that to Professor Dumbledore." "Sure," Naruto said pleasantly. Harry looked at his brother. "You knew." "I guessed. It makes sense, doesn't it? 2 of us. 1 spell. Something had to absorb the first impact." He shrugged with the ease of someone who had processed this information privately and arrived at equilibrium without making it anyone else's emergency. "Besides, I can feel it sometimes. Like something underneath my skin that isn't exactly mine but isn't exactly not mine either." He pressed his hand flat against his sternum, briefly. "It's been there my whole life. Whatever it is, it's not going anywhere. So there's no point worrying about it." Inside his chest, buried deep in a place that was more than physical, something vast and red and ancient turned over like a sleeping thing disturbed and not yet fully awake. "Good kid," it said to no one in particular. "Learn fast." Diagon Alley was a revelation. Not for the magic, though the magic was considerable, and Harry walked through it with an expression of someone discovering that color exists after a decade of gray, but for Naruto, it was the people. Specifically, the way the people looked at them. More specifically, the way they looked at Harry, and the particular combination of reverence and pity and loaded expectation that lived in those looks, and the way Harry's shoulders went slightly up under the weight of it, that old defensive hunch, the reflex of someone preparing to be too much and not enough simultaneously. Naruto kept pace beside him through Gringotts, through the winding alleys, through Madame Malkin's where they were measured and pinned and turned around like bolts of cloth. He watched. He noted. He bought robes in a particular shade of orange that the shop assistant called saffron and that Naruto called right without further explanation. Harry's robes were dark. Naruto's were orange. The contrast between them was vivid and immediate, and several people on the street did double takes. In Ollivander's, the old wandmaker looked at them both for a long time before he moved. He measured Harry first, the usual calibrated assessment of wood and core and flexibility. Then he measured Naruto, and partway through the measurement he stopped and set down his tape and looked at the boy with an expression that was not quite professional uncertainty and not quite awe, but lived in the country between. "You carry something," Ollivander said. "Not an accusation. Not a question." "I've been told," Naruto said. "Something old. Something that predates." Ollivander paused, choosing words with the care of a man who understood that precision mattered. "Predates most things I know. It's not magic, exactly. Not as we understand it. It's something that runs alongside magic, like a river next to a road." He tilted his head. "Remarkable. Does that mean I can't use a wand?" "It means your wand will have an interesting life." The old man moved into his stacks with renewed purpose. After a significant number of attempts, the wands that worked for Harry did not work for Naruto, and the wands that sparked for Naruto had qualities that Harry's phoenix feather holly couldn't match. Ollivander produced a wand that was warm before Naruto touched it. Maple, 11 inches, with a core of what Ollivander described as ironwood bark from a tree struck 7 times by lightning and still standing. Naruto picked it up and the air in the shop warmed, noticeably, briefly, and smelled for just a moment like summer storms and something else, something wild and enormous that Ollivander couldn't name but recognized the shape of. "Formidable," Ollivander said quietly. Quite formidable. "Thanks." Naruto set the wand down and paid for it. He picked up Harry's wand box too and tucked both under his arm. Harry gave him a look. Naruto handed him his own wand box without ceremony. "You looked like your hands were full." Harry's hands were not full. They both knew this. Naruto just couldn't watch Harry's face do the thing it did when he was overwhelmed and not do something, and this was the something available. September 1st arrived in the way that significant days do, not suddenly, but with a sense of things gathering, of a long exhale finally beginning. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos of the excellent kind, trunks and owls and families in various states of weeping or shouting, the scarlet engine breathing steam into the cold morning air, children in every size running in every direction. Naruto stepped through the barrier first and stood on the platform for a moment, taking it in. Something in his chest responded to the magic in the air here. Responded was the word, not activated, not alarmed, but the quiet acknowledgement of something recognizing its element. He put his hand against his sternum again, the private gesture, and felt the steady deep warmth underneath that was always there and today was slightly less deep than usual. Slightly closer to the surface. "I know," he thought at it, not knowing entirely what he was communicating, only that communication was happening. The warmth pulsed once. Agreed with him. Harry came through the barrier behind him and immediately collided with a red-haired family of spectacular size, mother, father, 5 children visible, one more somewhere in the mix by the sound of it. The mother, a broad woman with a warm face, was hugging a girl in tears about something and simultaneously directing trunks with her wand and keeping count of heads. She looked up when Harry appeared, and then looked at Naruto, and there was a half-second of recalibration on her face. "Are you," she began. "Potter," Naruto said. "Yeah. Both of us." "Oh, bless." She reached out and patted both their arms with the authority of a woman who has patted a great many arms and knows exactly what she's doing. "Molly Weasley. Don't worry about the barrier, it's a bit nerve-wracking the first time, isn't it? Just walk straight at it, though of course you've already, well. She smiled. You'll love Hogwarts. Both of you. The red-haired boy closest to them in age, Ron, introduced quickly and with the slight self-consciousness of someone performing an introduction they'd been hoping to avoid, attached himself to Harry with the easy magnetism of two people who are going to be friends and haven't quite realized it yet. Naruto watched this with quiet satisfaction and looked around the platform. A girl with large, earnest eyes and a great deal of brown hair was arguing with a boy about something and winning comprehensively. She caught Naruto looking, assessed him in a single rapid glance that was more thorough than it appeared, and said, "You're Naruto Potter. You've done your research. There's a Hogwarts, a history passage about the Knight Voldemort," she said the name without flinching, which Naruto noted, "attacked your family. Most people think it was just Harry who survived. But the original account mentions both children." She paused. "My name's Hermione Granger." "I know," Naruto said, though he didn't, not really, just that she felt right, felt like someone he should know, in the way that certain things in this life carried the echo of another. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone who has just encountered an interesting problem. "How do you know?" "I'm good with people." He wasn't, particularly. He was good with the concept of people, with their essential worth and their capacity for both greatness and stupidity, but he was frequently too direct to be socially fluent in the conventional sense. "You read books before you read the room. You already know more about this train and where it's going than anyone else on this platform. And you said Voldemort's name when most people won't." He held out his hand. "You're the kind of person worth knowing." Hermione shook his hand and looked slightly flustered, which on her was a state of extremely controlled visible emotion, a slight color in the cheeks and a more careful blink. "Well," she said. "Thank you." The train moved. The platform disappeared. England rolled past the windows in shades of gold and green, the last warmth of summer still in the fields, the sky doing the thing it does in the late afternoon of early September when it's not quite ready to become autumn. Harry and Ron played chess badly and talked about magic with the enthusiasm of two people whose respective lives had been severely deficient in magic. Hermione produced a book and read and occasionally corrected something Harry said with the air of someone who can't help it. Naruto sat with his back against the window and his knees up, watching all three of them. A boy named Draco Malfoy came to the compartment door with two large companions and the specific posture of someone who has never had to question whether they belonged anywhere. He looked at Harry with the practiced assessment of someone who has been briefed, looked at Ron with dismissal, looked at Hermione with dismissal that was doing extra work to appear as though it wasn't bothered, and then looked at Naruto. Something shifted in his expression. Just briefly. "You're the twin," he said. "Naruto Potter." No particular warmth, no particular hostility. Just a statement of equivalent weight. Malfoy recalibrated. The dismissal he'd had ready for a second Potter didn't quite fit, because Naruto wasn't looking at him the way Harry was, Harry's wariness, Ron's defensiveness. Naruto was just looking, level and calm, with those blue eyes that had an inconvenient quality of appearing to see exactly what they were looking at. Draco Malfoy. An olive branch of sorts, or at least the form of one. You'll find that in the wizarding world, it matters which family you associate with. "Does it?" Naruto said. "Not a question. Blood matters here." "Blood's just biology," Naruto said pleasantly. "What matters is what you do with the life it keeps running." He looked at Malfoy with the same level attention. "Come back when you've got something more interesting than that." Malfoy left. His companions left. The compartment was quiet for a moment. Ron exhaled. "That was, he's not stupid," Naruto said, which surprised everyone. "He's been told stupid things by people he trusts. There's a difference." He picked up a chocolate frog from the pile on the seat, because someone had been distributing them earlier, and ate it without ceremony. "Keep that in mind." The sorting hat was older than any other object Naruto had been near, and when it was placed on his head, he went after Harry, who went to Gryffindor to the enormous approval of a table full of red and gold and one Weasley after another, it went very quiet. Naruto sat with the hat over his eyes and waited. "Well," said the hat, inside his skull, with the tone of something that had sorted thousands of heads over 1,000 years and was not accustomed to being surprised. "Well, well, well. What are you?" "Naruto Potter," Naruto said. He'd been told it was just thoughts, that no one could hear. He said it anyway. "That's a name. I'm asking what you are." "Both of us are asking that," he admitted. The hat was quiet for a moment that felt longer inside than it looked outside. The hall watched. The teacher's table watched. Snape watched with the particular quality of attention that was not curious exactly but was the opposite of inattentive, sharp and still and cataloging. "There is something in you that I've never encountered in 1,000 years of sorting," the hat said finally. "A consciousness that is not yours, sleeping lightly. Something enormous. Something that has known war in ways this world hasn't seen for centuries." A pause. "It's watching me." "Yeah," Naruto said. "It does that. And you? What do you want?" This was apparently the question. Naruto considered it seriously, the way he'd learned early that serious things deserved. He thought about Harry on the platform, finding his first friend in the shape of a red-haired boy who played chess. He thought about Hermione, who said names that frightened other people without apparent effort. He thought about that photo of two people who'd loved them and died for it and left them in a cupboard under some stairs and the mystery of what they'd actually intended. "I want to be worth what they paid," he thought. Not at the hat, just at the general universe. "I want Harry to be safe. I want to be somewhere I can do something that matters." "Then," said the hat, and its voice had a quality of settling, of inevitability, like a key meeting a lock it was made for, "Gryffindor." The cheer from the table was already loud from Harry's sorting. It became something else when Naruto walked to it, bigger, somehow, with a quality that was about more than school-table loyalty. He sat next to Harry, who moved over instantly to make room, and Percy Weasley on Harry's other side began telling them about the rules with the enthusiasm of someone who finds rules genuinely delightful. Naruto ate approximately 4 people's worth of food at the feast and felt, for the first time in this life, like something was beginning. At the teacher's table, Quirinus Quirrell reached for his wine glass and stopped, hand halfway extended, arrested by something he couldn't have named, a sensation, a presence, like standing outside on a calm day and feeling, from somewhere, the distant pressure of approaching weather. Something enormous and old, something that didn't belong in a school full of children, something that had been in this room for the last hour and had just sat down at the Gryffindor table. On the back of his head, beneath the turban, something that had not experienced fear in a decade felt it now, brief, sharp, undeniable. "What," said Lord Voldemort, "was that?" Quirrell drank his wine and said nothing and hoped very hard that whatever it was had not noticed them. It had. Later, in the dormitory, Harry and Naruto lay in adjacent beds with the curtains not quite drawn, the castle settling around them with the sounds of old stone and older magic, wind at the windows, the distant hoot of owls. Ron was already asleep, the specific, immediate sleep of someone with no complicated feelings about where they were. Hermione was 2 doors down in the girls' dormitory, and Naruto had a specific confidence that she was not asleep but was reading something she'd found in the common room. "Hey," Harry said quietly. "Yeah. Did you feel something at dinner?" Naruto looked at the ceiling. The stone was smooth up there, slightly luminescent in the dark with some quality of the castle's enchantment. "Yeah. Something wrong?" Naruto thought about the turban, about Quirrell's hand stopping mid-reach, about the way the teacher had not looked at them all evening with an effort that was itself a kind of looking. He thought about the warmth in his chest that had sharpened, briefly, at dinner, and then settled back with the satisfaction of something that had taken a reading and filed it away. "Nothing I can't handle," he said. Harry was quiet for a moment, and Naruto knew he was deciding whether to push. He didn't push. He'd learned, in years of the cupboard and the Dursleys and the long architecture of each other's silences, which questions needed asking now and which could wait. Okay, Harry said. The castle breathed around them. The lake outside held whatever it held in its depths. Somewhere in the corridors below, a cat with a flat face was beginning a patrol, and a caretaker with a grudge against children was following it. Naruto closed his eyes. In the deep place, the vast and ancient thing that had crossed some impossible boundary between one life and another, between one world and this one, settled like water finding its level. Not content, not yet, it was not the nature of the thing to be content easily. But present. Ready. Waiting, with the patience of something that measured time in seasons and centuries rather than minutes, for whatever this small complicated world was going to try next. Sleep, Kit, it said, not quite in words. For once, Naruto obeyed. Chapter 2, Red Chakra Rising. The castle learned them the way old things learn new inhabitants, slowly, through repetition, through the particular grooves that people carve into spaces simply by moving through them every day. Harry learned the castle by getting lost in it. This was not a failure of navigation so much as a quality of his attention. He moved through corridors thinking about something else, ended up somewhere he didn't intend, and thereby discovered shortcuts and oddities and the specific character of Hogwarts' organized chaos faster than students who actually tried to memorize the floor plan. He found a classroom on the 4th floor that appeared to be perpetually expecting a lesson that never arrived, desks arranged, chalk at the board, no dust. He found a window on the 2nd floor that opened onto a view that couldn't exist given the castle's geometry, a courtyard that wasn't there when you looked from outside. He found Ron, who knew the castle well enough, and between the two of them they constructed a working map of the navigable school in about 3 weeks. Naruto learned the castle the way he learned everything, by walking through it like he belonged there and paying attention to what talked back. Because things did talk back, in Hogwarts. Not in voices, not in words. The staircases moved, which everyone knew, and which most first years treated as an inconvenience and eventually a navigational consideration. Naruto treated it as a conversation. The staircases moved toward him, more often than not, swinging into position before he'd fully decided where he was going, as though the castle was anticipating. The portraits watched him with more interest than they watched other students, not the celebrity interest they had in Harry but something closer to recognition, the way you look at someone whose face you know from somewhere you can't quite place. One portrait of a medieval knight tracked him through 3 different frames in a 2nd-floor corridor over the course of a week before finally saying, abruptly, as Naruto was passing on a Thursday afternoon, "What are you, boy?" "Working on it," Naruto said without stopping. The knight appeared to find this acceptable. The dungeons were interesting. Not the Slytherin common room, he had no access to that, and no particular desire for it, though he suspected it was more complicated and less uniformly villainous than the Gryffindor tables seemed to believe. The dungeons themselves, the stones and the cold and the particular quality of old magic that lived down there in the dark, had a density that the rest of the castle didn't. Like pressure at depth. Naruto walked through them on the 2nd weekend, not sneaking, not hiding, just walking, and felt the thing in his chest respond to the old magic the way iron responds to a magnet, not movement, but orientation. A sense of which direction something important lay. The corridor with the locked door on the 3rd floor they'd been warned about, that direction. Always that direction. Whatever was in there had a presence, a field of significance, and Naruto's internal compass didn't let him forget it. But that was a problem for later. Potions was first. Snape's classroom had the quality of a room that has been made intentionally uncomfortable through careful curation rather than neglect, dim, cold, jars of things along the walls that were both decorative and a kind of warning, the setup of a person who had decided that discomfort was pedagogically useful and maintained it with professional commitment. Naruto found this more interesting than threatening. He'd spent 10 years in a cupboard. A dim room with interesting jars was practically a luxury. He sat next to Harry. Hermione sat in front of them, already reading her copy of magical drafts and potions with the focused attention of someone who intends to be ahead. Ron sat on Harry's other side, looking at Hermione's reading with the expression of someone calculating whether there's time to catch up and deciding, provisionally, probably not. Snape arrived without announcement, the doors simply opening for him as though it had been waiting, and moved to the front of the room with the particular economy of someone who has no movement to waste. He looked at his class with dark eyes that processed the room in categories: known quantity, unknown quantity, interesting, irrelevant, and those eyes stopped on Harry for exactly the duration of something complicated happening behind them, and then moved to Naruto. They stayed there. Snape was not a man given to visible surprise. But there was something in the quality of his stillness as he looked at Naruto that was different from how he looked at everything else, more careful, more held, the attention of someone who has detected something they weren't expecting and is deciding how to proceed. Then he began his speech. The famous one, Hermione had mentioned it, she'd heard it from older students, the speech about bottled fame and brewed glory and the delicate art of potion making. He delivered it beautifully, with the dry precision of someone who had written it once and refined it through iteration until every word landed where intended. And then he looked at Harry and asked a question, a technical question, Bezoars and aconite and the deliberately obscure, and Harry, who had not read ahead, did not know the answer. Snape noted this with the relish of someone whose estimation has been confirmed. Then he looked at Naruto. Potter, he said, and the name had a different weight this time, slightly uncertain, as though the name didn't quite fit. The other Potter. Since your brother appears to have inherited his father's commitment to preparation, a pause thin as a blade, perhaps you can tell me about the properties of powdered bicorn horn. Naruto, who had also not read ahead, because he'd spent the previous evening helping Harry and Ron untangle the logic of their defense against the dark arts homework and hadn't gotten to potions, said, "It's a potion ingredient. Polyjuice potion, I think. Changes something about physical form." Snape's expression didn't change. "You think?" "I also think it's a deliberately obscure question designed to establish classroom hierarchy rather than assess actual preparedness, since we've been here approximately 6 days. But you'd know better than me." The room went very quiet. Ron made a small sound beside Harry that he immediately converted into a cough. Snape looked at Naruto for a long moment. Naruto looked back with the same level calm he brought to everything, not defiant exactly, defiance implies antagonism, and he wasn't antagonized, he was just accurate. He'd been in enough situations to know the difference between genuine authority and performed authority, and Snape had both, which made him actually interesting. 5 points from Gryffindor, Snape said, for speaking without being asked to elaborate. Fair, Naruto said. 10 points from Gryffindor, Snape said, for responding to a deduction with equanimity designed to irritate. Hermione made a strangled sound. Ron's face had gone through several colors. Harry looked at Naruto with an expression that was partly exasperation and partly something that was trying very hard not to be admiration. Naruto said nothing. He'd made his point. The dynamic was established. Snape knew he wasn't going to roll over, which meant the rest of the year would be an honest transaction rather than a performance, and an honest transaction was something Naruto could work with. After class, Hermione fell into step beside him with the energy of someone who has been holding in a conversation for 50 minutes. "You do realize," she said, "that antagonizing Snape is going to make every potions lesson for the next 7 years significantly more difficult." "I didn't antagonize him. I told the truth." "That is antagonizing him." With Snape, specifically, truth-telling can be, she searched for the word, provocative. "Good." At Hermione's expression, "I'd rather he see me clearly than have a version of me that he's comfortable with." Comfortable means predictable. "I'd rather be legible." Hermione looked at him sideways. "Legible," she repeated. "If he knows what I am, he can work with it. If he thinks I'm just another student he can categorize, he'll try to categorize me wrong and then be annoyed when I don't fit." He shrugged. "Better to show the shape of the thing early." Hermione was quiet for a moment. They were in the corridor now, moving toward the next class, Harry and Ron a few steps ahead debating whether the 15 points lost were worth whatever had just happened. "That's actually," she started. "That's quite sophisticated. Don't sound surprised." "I'm not surprised, I'm impressed, which is different." She sounded slightly annoyed at herself for admitting it. "There's a difference. He grinned at her, and the grin had too much sunlight in it for a dungeon corridor in Scotland in September. I know. By the third week, Naruto had established something that could only be called a reputation, though it didn't look like the kind of reputation that usually formed around famous names. Harry's reputation was preloaded, the boy who lived, the lightning scar, the name that made adults pause and students stare. It carried weight that Harry himself hadn't chosen and visibly didn't quite know what to do with, like wearing someone else's coat that was almost the right size. Naruto's reputation was built from scratch, day by day, through the accumulation of things that people witnessed directly and then told other people. There was the incident in Charms where Flitwick's levitation exercise had gotten away from a third year in the corridor outside, a very heavy encyclopedia floating at an alarming speed toward a cluster of first years who hadn't seen it coming, and Naruto had reached up, without apparent urgency, and caught it with his bare hand. Flitwick had stared. The encyclopedia was heavy enough that most students couldn't have levitated it in the first place. Naruto had set it down, nodded at the third year, and walked to his next class. There was the incident in Transfiguration where McGonagall had demonstrated the matchstick-to-needle transformation and then invited students to attempt it, and Naruto had sat with his matchstick for approximately 30 seconds, not trying, not waving his wand, just sitting with his hand flat on the desk and the matchstick beneath it, and when he lifted his hand the matchstick was a needle, except that it was warm, which needles generally aren't, and when McGonagall examined it she looked at Naruto with an expression that she quickly rearranged into professional neutrality. "Good," she said, and moved on, and did not call on him again that class, though her eyes returned to him at intervals. And then there was the moment in the corridor with Marcus Flint. Flint was a fifth-year Slytherin, broad, not particularly invested in the subtleties of interhouse relations, and had taken a pointed interest in Harry Potter after the sorting, not from genuine hostility, more from the Slytherin-specific habit of establishing the social landscape through a series of tests that could be plausibly denied as anything other than tests. He'd started with comments, moved to comments with additional weight applied, and on a Thursday in the third week had cornered Harry between classes with two of his friends in an arrangement that stopped just short of explicit threat. Harry had squared his shoulders and not backed up, which was already different from what he'd have done 6 months ago. He didn't need to do anything else, because Naruto came around the corner and walked directly into the situation without slowing down, without the brief recalibration that most people do when they walk into something unexpected. He just walked in, the way water joins water when there's no wall between them. "Hi," he said to Flint. Just hi. Not aggressive. Not submissive. Just the easy greeting of someone who has decided this is a conversation. Flint looked at him. Naruto was smaller than him, first year small, which should have been all the calculation necessary. But there was something about the way Naruto stood, not braced, not tense, just present, with a weight to his presence that didn't match the size of the body doing it, that made the quick calculation come out wrong. "This doesn't involve you," Flint said. "Harry's my brother," Naruto said pleasantly. "Pretty much everything involves me. Your brother needs to understand how things work around here." "Okay." Naruto leaned against the corridor wall, arms loose at his sides, in the posture of someone prepared to be here as long as necessary. "What's your version of how things work?" Flint blinked. He'd expected fear, or defiance, or the particular brittle courage of someone performing bravery they don't feel. He hadn't expected interest. Like Naruto was genuinely curious about his answer and would listen to it seriously. It threw the whole architecture of the moment sideways. "The famous Potter name doesn't mean anything in Slytherin," Flint said, which was true enough. "Good," Naruto said. "Harry doesn't want it to mean anything. He didn't choose it." He looked at Flint with that level attention. "What does mean something to you?" A pause. "Strength." "Then we don't have a problem." He straightened off the wall. "Because we're not weak. Come on, Harry." He walked away, and Harry fell into step beside him, and behind them Flint stood with his two friends in a corridor that had somehow failed to go the way corridors like that were supposed to go. One of the friends said, quietly, "What just happened?" and Flint didn't answer, because he wasn't entirely sure. Defense against the dark arts was, by consensus of every student who attended, deeply strange. Professor Quirrell taught with the quality of someone doing an impression of a person who was teaching, technically correct, covering the material, hitting the syllabi, but with an underlying absence, like there was less person there than the body suggested. He stuttered, but not consistently. Sometimes the stutter appeared mid-sentence and sometimes it didn't appear at all, and the inconsistency was more disturbing than either extreme would have been. He wore his turban to class every day. The garlic smell he'd apparently had in previous years was gone, replaced by nothing, which was its own kind of smell. Every class, he flinched when Naruto walked in. Not dramatically. Not a full-body recoil. Just a microsecond of arrested motion, a breath held for a half-beat too long, eyes that found Naruto and then looked away with slightly too much purpose. Harry noticed it by the second week. Hermione noticed it by the second class. Ron noticed it approximately on week 4, which was still faster than most. What none of them noticed was that Naruto noticed it first, from the feast, from the moment across the Great Hall when Quirrell's hand had stopped moving. He'd been noting it every class since, logging it with the methodical patience of someone keeping a record of something that hasn't yet become a problem but is clearly practicing. The chakra warmth in his chest did something specific near Quirrell. It didn't spike, didn't alarm, it steadied, in the way that attention steadies when it finds a target. The Nine Tails, Naruto had started thinking of it in those terms, though the knowledge came from the fragments, from the dream memories of another life that surfaced occasionally at the edges of sleep, had a sense for threats that was older and more fundamental than any detection spell. It wasn't reading magic. It was reading wrongness. The particular quality of something that was using something else as a container. He hadn't told Harry yet. He was watching. The troll changed the timeline. It was Halloween. The Great Hall was decorated spectacularly, carved pumpkins and floating candles and a feast that Naruto estimated he could have eaten about a quarter of himself if Hermione hadn't kicked him under the table twice for attempting exactly that. The mood was the particular elevated warmth of a successful holiday, students happy and fed and far from home in a way that had gradually become comfortable rather than dislocating. Then Quirrell burst in. He burst in with a quality that Naruto clocked immediately as performance. The stagger was technically correct, the words, troll in the dungeon, thought you ought to know, delivered in the right register, but the eyes were wrong. They didn't go to Dumbledore the way genuinely frightened eyes would. They tracked something else briefly, something private, before Quirrell collapsed in his theatrical faint with the timing of a man who has decided this is the moment to stop being visible. The hall erupted. Dumbledore restored order with a controlled authority that Naruto filed away. This was a man who had presence the way geography has presence, shapingly, unmistakably. Prefects mobilized. Students filed out by house toward their common rooms. Harry grabbed Naruto's arm in the crowd. Hermione, he said. She's in the bathroom off the second-floor corridor, Naruto said. He knew because he'd heard Parvati mention it 2 hours ago and Hermione hadn't come to dinner, and he'd noted it and not acted on it because there was nothing to act on then, but the information had stayed filed. Harry's face did something complicated and then resolved. We have to go get her. Yeah. Naruto was already moving, which answered Ron's beginning question of, shouldn't we go to the common room, before he could finish it, because Ron, to his credit, just exhaled and followed. The troll was in the second-floor corridor. It was, objectively, enormous, 12 feet of knuckle-dragging, club-wielding, spectacularly dim mountain troll, filling the corridor the way a physical disaster fills a corridor, smashing methodically at whatever presented itself for smashing. Hermione was in the bathroom. The sounds from inside the bathroom were the sounds of someone applying rigorous problem-solving to a situation that problem-solving alone was not going to solve. Ron immediately looked at Harry. Harry looked at Naruto. Naruto was already looking at the troll with the serene attentiveness of someone watching weather. Hermione, Ron managed, voice slightly strangled. We have to, I know. Naruto put his wand in his hand, not flourishing it, just holding it with the same ease he held anything. Then he walked into the corridor. Not ran. Walked. Toward the 12-foot troll. Ron made a sound that was probably a word in some language. Harry said, "Naruto," and then stopped, because Harry had known Naruto for 11 years and counting, and he recognized the quality of the walk. The troll turned. Trolls have minimal visual acuity but are extremely responsive to movement, and Naruto walking toward it was the kind of movement that registered. It raised its club. The club was the size of a small car, and looked down at this thing that was walking toward it, this thing that was 12 feet shorter than it, and seemed to be unaware of this fact. Naruto stopped about 10 feet from it. "Hey," he said. The troll swung the club. Naruto moved. Not with magic, not a spell, not a shield charm, he simply moved, the way he'd been moving since he was 4 years old in the Desley Garden, with the fluid economy of someone who has trained in another life and whose body remembers it even if his mind doesn't fully. He went under the arc of the club and was beside the troll before the swing had completed, and he put his hand flat against the troll's knee, the closest available surface, and pushed. The troll went sideways. Not dramatically, not sent flying. Naruto was 11, the physics alone were against drama, but the push had something else in it, something that came from the deep worn place, a brief surge of red-tinged chakra that went through the contact point like a key turning, and the troll's leg went suddenly uncertain beneath it. It stumbled. Its club came down on empty corridor, punching a crater into the flagstones. Wingardium Leviosa, Ron's voice, above and behind, he'd climbed something, a collapsed section of shelving from a nearby closet, getting height, and the spell hit the club, and the club wrenched out of the troll's grip and rose, and then came back down on the troll's head. The troll sat down like a building settling. It was quiet in the corridor except for the troll's breathing, which was slow and deep and suggested it was not dead but was taking a moment to reconsider the direction its evening had taken. The bathroom door opened and Hermione came out. She looked at the troll. She looked at Harry and Ron, who were disheveled. She looked at Naruto, who was standing next to the troll's knee with his hand still slightly extended and his wand at his side, and who had a smear of something on his jacket that was hopefully just corridor dust. "Are you all right?" she said, which was directed at the room. "Fine," Harry said. "I threw the club," Ron said, with the specific pride of someone who did a meaningful thing in a crisis and wants it noted. "You absolutely did," Naruto said, and meant it fully. Ron's face went red and delighted in the way it did when someone took him seriously. Hermione looked at Naruto. Her expression was the expression she got when she was processing something that didn't fit into her existing framework and was actively rebuilding the framework to accommodate it. "You walked toward it," she said. "It was between me and you. You walked toward it. I know. I was there." "That's not," she stopped. Started again. "Most people's instinct is away." Naruto looked at her with those water-blue eyes that were placid on the surface and fathomless underneath. "I know what mine is," he said simply. The teachers arrived. There were questions and removed house points and McGonagall's expression that was professionally stern and personally something else, something that looked at the three of them, for, if you counted Naruto, and you always counted Naruto, with a complicated private feeling she didn't allow to reach her face. Quirrell arrived with the other teachers and stood at the back of the group and did not look at the unconscious troll. He looked at Naruto. Naruto looked back, and the warmth in his chest said, very clearly, "There." On Quirrell's face, for just a half-second before he looked away, was an expression that wasn't Quirrell's. It was something older and colder and much more frightened. The aftermath of the troll became the architecture of a friendship. This was how it happened. Hermione, who had been somewhat of a solitary planet before Halloween, respected, occasionally resented, more often admired at a distance, became simply part of them in the way that certain things become permanent after a specific event changes the definition of permanent. She had her own chair at their table in the library within a week. She had opinions about all of their homework and shared them without being asked and was right often enough that being asked became redundant. She and Ron argued about roughly a third of all topics they raised, which Harry had initially found stressful before recognizing that for both of them the argument was a form of engagement, a kind of interested contact, and that they were both better for it. She also, quietly and with no announcement, started studying Naruto. Not obviously. Not the way she studied texts, she didn't take notes on him, didn't ask clinical questions. But he'd catch her watching him sometimes, the focused and precise observation of someone who has encountered a phenomenon and is building a theory. The troll incident. The castle's behavior around him. The way he put his hand on the troll's knee. The way the heat near him sometimes was slightly more than room temperature. 3 weeks after Halloween, she showed up at the table where he was eating an apple and apparently staring at nothing, which was actually him listening to something he couldn't quite hear. The castle, maybe, or the thing in his chest, which had been more active lately, less dormant, more like it was paying attention to something, and she put a book down in front of him. Chakra, an Eastern magical theory, the spine read. A library book, old enough that the pages were foxed at the edges, clearly not much borrowed. He looked at it. Looked at her. She sat down across from him with the composure of someone who has prepared for this. It's a very small chapter in a very large book about global magical traditions, she said. Most wizarding literature is fairly, a diplomatic pause, parochial. But there's a chapter on Eastern traditions that includes a section about what some cultures call life energy. Chi prana. Chakra. Something that runs alongside magic but isn't magic. Something that the body produces rather than channels externally. He was very still. It says, she continued, opening the book to a marked page, reading with the precision she brought to everything she cared about, that in some traditions, particularly in regions that had different relationships with natural energy, specific individuals could accumulate or channel this energy to a degree far beyond the human norm. And that in certain historical accounts that most Western wizarding scholars dismiss as mythology, extraordinarily powerful concentrations of this energy could be housed. Like a container. She stopped. Met his eyes. Like a seal. He took the book from her. Read the passage himself. Put it down. How long have you known, he asked. That something was different about you? First day. No hesitation, no apology. That it was this specifically? 2 weeks. What do you think it is? She looked at him with an expression that had discarded all social padding and was just the actual thing underneath, curious, careful, entirely unafraid. I think something lives in you. Something enormous. I think it's been there since you were born and it has something to do with what happened the night Voldemort attacked your family and I think it's why Quirrell flinches every time you walk into a room. She said Quirrell's name with the emphasis she gave words that were conclusions, not questions. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, does it scare you? Yes, she said. And I find it extraordinarily interesting. Both things are true. He looked at her for a moment. She held the look without flinching. His name was Kurama, Naruto said. In another life, I think. A fox. The biggest one, the nine-tailed, he stopped. I don't have all of it. Fragments. Like a story someone told me a long time ago in a language I'm still translating. But he's real. He's in here. Hand to sternum. The private gesture. And he's watching Quirrell. Hermione processed this with the speed and order of someone for whom new information is not threatening but structural. Watching him. Whatever is in Quirrell's turban, Kurama can feel it. And it's afraid of him. She absorbed this. Voldemort, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I think so. She looked at the book in front of her, then back at him. We should tell Dumbledore. What do we tell him? That I have a massive supernatural fox spirit in my chest and he can smell the Dark Lord on our defense teacher. A pause. When you phrase it that way, we need more than that, Naruto said. We watch. We learn. And when we know enough to say something that matters, we say it. Hermione looked like this conflicted significantly with her instinct to take information to the appropriate authority immediately. But she also looked at him with the expression she'd had in the corridor after the troll, the one that was rebuilding a framework, and said, "All right. We watch." December came in cold and grey in particular, the lake under ice and the grounds under frost and the great hall under enchanted snowfall that was beautiful the first time and wet the fifth. Naruto wore his winter robes open at the collar and was visibly comfortable at temperatures that had Ron bundled to the ears and Harry wearing 2 scarves, and when Hermione pointed this out he said, mildly, that he ran hot, which was more literally true than he intended. The night before the Christmas holidays, the common room was mostly empty, students left, homework abandoned until January with the specific willful amnesia of people who've decided the future is future Hermione's problem. Harry and Ron were playing chess. Naruto was on the floor in front of the fire with his back against the couch, doing the thing he did occasionally that Hermione had started observing, sitting perfectly still with his eyes closed and his hands loose in his lap and his breathing in a pattern that was too deliberate to be sleep but too slow to be ordinary wakefulness. He was talking to Kurama. Not in words, not exactly. It was closer to the way you know what a familiar person needs before they've said it, a communication through the quality of attention, through the shape of what each of them was paying attention to. Kurama was more present this month than he'd been in September. The castle's magic, the concentrations of old and deliberate power, fed something in the old fox the way sunlight feeds something in plants, not growing, exactly, more like being reminded of what he was. Quirrell, Naruto thought. The turban. The response was not words. It was the specific quality of contempt that a thing that has encountered real power feels for something that mimics it, a lord of destruction nested in a human skull like a parasite, diminished, dependent, diminished. The contempt was the most informative thing. It told him what Voldemort was now, in his current state, as precisely as any explanation could. Can he hurt Harry? The warmth in his chest did something complicated. Not dismissal of the possibility. Kurama was honest, had always been honest about what things could do and what they couldn't. But underneath the honesty was the bedrock, not while I'm here. Naruto opened his eyes. The fire was low and orange, Harry was losing at chess and accepting this with reasonable grace, Ron was narrating the chess game with the gentle satisfaction of someone who is very good at one specific thing and knows it. He thought about what Hermione had said. We watch. He thought about the third-floor corridor. The locked door. The presence behind it that his internal compass never let him forget. He looked at Harry, who was laughing at something Ron said, the laugh that still occasionally startled Naruto because Harry had been so economical with laughter in the Dursley house, as though it was a resource that had to be rationed, and Harry had more of it now, 4 months into this, more of it every week, as though it was regenerating in an environment that didn't actively suppress it. He thought, I will figure out what's in that corridor. I will figure out what's living in Quirrell's head. And nothing is going to touch what's sitting in that chair right now. Across the room, Hermione looked up from her book and met his eyes, and something in her expression said she was thinking something adjacent. Not the same thoughts, but the same direction. He nodded, once. She nodded back, and returned to her book. It was late January when Snape caught him alone. Not caught, exactly, Naruto was walking back from the library, legitimate errand, Hermione's book returned on Hermione's behalf because she was neck-deep in an essay and had made a specific face at him that communicated both I would take this back myself and I absolutely cannot leave right now. The corridor was quiet, evening settling into the castle, the torches doing their warm low work. Snape stepped out of a classroom as Naruto passed, and this was clearly not accidental, because the classroom was Snape's own office on this floor and you didn't step accidentally out of your own office. Potter, he said. The name had settled into something more neutral with Snape over the past months, less pointed, which was a kind of progress. Professor. Naruto stopped. Waited. Snape looked at him with that careful quality, the assessment that processed without broadcasting its conclusions. He was in his teaching robes, the evening light from the window behind him making him a dark geometry against it. He didn't speak immediately, which with Snape meant he was choosing, and with Snape, choosing meant the thing he eventually said would be worth listening to. You felt it, Snape said. On the night of the feast. When Quirrell came in. Not a question. Yes, Naruto said. What did you feel? Naruto considered Snape. Read him the way he'd always read people, threat level, trustworthiness, the particular thing they were hiding and whether the hiding was protective or predatory. Snape was the most complicated read in the castle. He was hiding something enormous, had been for years by the quality of it, and the hiding was deeply practiced and entirely deliberate. But the question he just asked was a real question. Not a test, not a trap. He wanted to know, and he was asking because he'd decided Naruto might actually tell him. Something wrong, Naruto said. Something living in the wrong container. Scared of me. Snape's expression didn't change, but the quality of his attention did, sharpened, slightly, in the way attention sharpens when it finds what it was looking for. You're aware of your, he paused. The pause was selecting a word for a phenomenon he had clearly considered at some length. Situation. Aware enough. And the awareness of your situation allows you to detect parasites, Naruto said. Things that nest in people. Yeah. Snape was quiet for a moment. Then he said, without inflection, with the careful neutrality of someone delivering dangerous information from behind professional glass, be careful, this year. Some things that appear to be traps are traps. The corridor on the 3rd floor is not a rumor. I know. And some things that appear to be protecting you are not protecting you. A pause. At all. Necessarily. Naruto looked at him. Snape looked back. There was something in the dark eyes that was not kindness exactly. Snape didn't do kindness easily, you could tell it had been knocked out of him by something long past and had been growing back slowly and unevenly ever since, but it was something in the same family. A warning from someone who has been standing near a fire for a long time and knows exactly what burns. Okay, Naruto said. Snape studied him for another moment. Then, with the briskness of someone who has said the thing and intends to treat it as unsaid, 10 points to Gryffindor. For returning library books in a timely manner. He went back into his office. The door closed. Naruto stood in the corridor for a moment, thinking about what some things that appear to be protecting you meant in this specific school, in this specific year, with Voldemort in a turban 40 feet away from them every Tuesday and Thursday. He thought about the 3rd floor corridor. The locked door. The pull of it. He thought, soon. The castle breathed around him, old and magic and patient, and in his chest Kurama stirred once, in agreement. Chapter 3, The Forest remembers the detention was Neville's fault, technically. Not in any way that Neville intended, and not in any way that Naruto held against him. Neville Longbottom was one of those people who existed in a state of perpetual sincere effort, trying hard at everything and succeeding at things in the wrong order, managing to be brilliant at herbology and catastrophic at potions and somewhere in the middle at everything else. Moving through Hogwarts with the specific quality of someone who has been told they're not enough by people whose opinion of them was the actual problem. Naruto liked him considerably. Neville reminded him of something he couldn't quite name, a fragment from the dream life, someone who chose to stand up when standing up was the harder and less logical option. What Neville had done was be in the corridor at midnight. What he'd been doing there was trying to warn Harry and Ron, who had apparently made an arrangement involving a dragon egg and a tower roof that Naruto had been deliberately not informed about on the grounds that Hermione had found out about it and her objections had been comprehensive enough for everyone. Neville had intercepted the information and gone to warn them and been caught in the corridor by McGonagall along with Harry and Ron coming back down, and Hermione who had been there to say I told you so in person, and, in a remarkable stroke of coincidence, Draco Malfoy, who had apparently also heard about the dragon and come to witness the consequences. All 5 of them had received detention. Naruto had not been involved in any of it. He found out at breakfast from Harry's guilty expression, which was not subtle. Harry's face was an excellent emotional instrument, everything showed, layered and quick, the opposite of Naruto's quality of stillness. He was looking at his porridge with the focused attention of someone who is hoping that if they don't look up the difficult conversation won't begin. Detention, Naruto said. I can explain. Dragon egg. Harry looked up. How did you? Hagrid mentioned a Norwegian ridgeback to me 3 weeks ago and then got extremely cagey about it. You visited Hagrid every other day for a month. You're not that interested in pumpkins. He ate a piece of toast. Where's the detention? Harry exhaled in a way that suggested he'd been braced for a more extensive response. Forbidden Forest. Tonight. With Hagrid. Naruto was quiet for a moment. The Forbidden Forest. He'd been thinking about it since September. It sat at the edge of the grounds with the specific gravity of something that meant to be taken seriously, dense and old and full of something that wasn't quite dark and wasn't quite light but was definitively alive in ways that the curated magic of the castle wasn't. His internal compass, the one that always knew where the third-floor corridor was, also always knew where the forest was. Both pulled, in different ways. The corridor pulled with the specific tension of a coiled thing. The forest pulled like deep water, not threatening exactly, but honest about its depth. I'm coming, Naruto said. It's not your detention. I know. He reached past Harry for the marmalade. I'm coming anyway. Hagrid met them at 9 at the edge of the forest, lantern in hand, enormous in the darkness in the way that large good people are enormous in darkness, more reassuring than threatening, a landmark rather than an obstacle. He looked at the assembled detention servers with the expression of someone who felt guilty about the punishment and was going to try to make it interesting anyway. Filch was there too, depositing them with the relish of a man who has waited years for this moment, before retreating to the castle with the specific satisfaction of someone whose night was now complete. Hagrid looked at Naruto. Yeah, didn't have detention. No, Naruto agreed. Hagrid looked at him for a moment, his enormous face doing something thoughtful. Then he said, right. Follow me, then. The forest was immediate. The transition from the grounds to beneath the trees was the transition between two different kinds of real. The grounds were managed, intentional, shaped by human magic over centuries. The forest was shaped by something older that had made its own decisions about what shape it wanted. The trees were massive and close and the canopy overhead blocked the stars so completely that Hagrid's lantern became the only light, a small moving sun in the absolute dark. Naruto walked slightly ahead of the others. Not leading, Hagrid was leading, knew the paths, but positioned at the front of the group out of the same instinct that had always put him between things and Harry. He moved without noise, which was something the others noticed and didn't comment on, because it was one of those Naruto facts that was just true and slightly inexplicable. Harry and Hermione walked close together. Ron was behind them, watching the dark between the trees with the active suspicion of someone cataloging threats. Draco was behind Ron, and his particular brand of fear was the kind that expressed itself as pointed silence. The words dried up when there was nothing left to hide behind them. Neville was last, and Neville was terrified in the honest and visible way, but he was there and walking, which was what mattered. They were looking for a unicorn. Hagrid explained as they walked, there'd been a unicorn found dead, another one injured, something in the forest was hunting them. They were looking for the injured one, to help if they could, to understand what was doing this if they could. What hunts unicorns? Harry asked. Something that's desperate enough, Hagrid said, which was an answer that implied a great deal. Unicorn blood is powerful stuff. Sustaining. Keeps ya alive even when, he paused. When other things wouldn't. Naruto thought about parasites. About things in wrong containers. About the locked corridor on the 3rd floor and the pull of it and what it was probably protecting. He said nothing. He walked. The forest responded to him. Not dramatically, not parting dramatically, not the trees leaning aside for some chosen one narrative that he had no patience for. It was subtler. The sounds of the forest, the small sounds, rustles and wing beats and things moving in the undergrowth, didn't go silent when he passed the way they went silent for Hagrid, the automatic quiet of small things near large things. They continued. Some of them got louder, closer, as though the presence in his chest was a known frequency to the forest's biology, a sound on a register that said not a threat, not prey, something else, something older. He felt the eyes before he saw them. Centaur eyes, watching from between trees, at the limit of the lantern's light. 2 of them, then 3, tall and broad-chested in the shadow, the human torso rising from the horse body with the specific gravity of creatures who were not mythological but simply categorized wrong by people who needed myths more than they needed accuracy. Their eyes were on Naruto in the particular way that things that are old look at things they recognize. He met the eyes of the nearest one. Held the gaze. The centaur, bay-colored, serious-faced, with a bow across his back and a quality of authority to his posture, looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something that none of the students except Naruto saw, he inclined his head. A small motion. Not a bow, not submission, more the acknowledgement between things of equivalent weight. Naruto returned it. The centaur melted back into the dark. You saw them, Hermione said quietly beside him. She hadn't seen the head inclination but she'd seen his attention move and track and respond. She was always watching for the edges of what he did. Yeah. They don't usually come that close. No, he agreed. She looked at him, and he looked at the forest, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was, they came close because of you. Hagrid split them into groups. Harry, Hermione, and Naruto went one way, deeper into the trees, toward the area where the second unicorn had been reported. Hagrid took Ron, Neville, and Draco along the outer path, lantern making them a moving glow between the trunks. Within a few minutes the glow was gone and the forest had closed around the 3 of them with the completeness of something that has swallowed you and isn't worried about it. Right, Harry said, quietly. So we're alone in the forbidden forest at night. We have wands, Hermione said. And Naruto, Harry added, which he clearly meant as a third category. Naruto was ahead of them again, moving through the undergrowth as though the dark was simply a different kind of light that he was reading by different means. His eyes had adjusted in the way eyes adjust when they have something helping them, the chakra warmth sitting close to the surface tonight, aware of its environment, giving the dark a texture it didn't have for ordinary sight. He stopped. Harry and Hermione stopped behind him. In the clearing ahead, the silver body of the unicorn was barely visible, white enough to glow faintly in the dark, lying on its side in the way that living things don't lie unless they're past choosing their position. The grass around it was silver too, the blood catching what little light existed and making it something beautiful and wrong. Oh, Hermione said, very quietly. Something was hunched over the unicorn. Not an animal, animals have a quality of purposefulness even in violence, a clean intention to the act. This was something else. Hunched and dark and drinking, with the specific desperation of something that no longer has a choice about what it's become. The silver blood on the ground and the silver blood on the creature's hands and the silver blood running at the corners of what might have been a mouth. Harry took a step forward, instinctive. Harry's instinct was always toward things that needed stopping, which was going to make his life complicated and important in roughly equal measure. The creature's head came up. It was not a face. It was the suggestion of a face, assembled from something that had once been more, that had been reduced to this by choices and circumstances and the specific kind of ambition that eats everything you feed it and then starts on the feeder. It looked at Harry. Harry's scar erupted. Not the occasional twinge Naruto had seen him touch and dismiss, this was Harry's hands going to his forehead and his knees buckling and a sound leaving him that wasn't quite a cry and was worse for not being one. The creature started toward him with the directional intention of something that has recognized what it wants. Naruto stepped in front of Harry. The creature stopped. Not because of the wand Naruto had out, held with the easy looseness of someone who may or may not use it. Not because of anything Naruto said, because he didn't say anything. He just stood between the creature and his brother, and the thing that happened in his chest happened. The warmth became heat. Not dramatic, not visible, Naruto didn't glow, didn't transform, nothing cinematic occurred. But the temperature in the clearing rose by 15 degrees in 2 seconds, and the red-gold chakra that was usually deep and dormant came to the surface like something surfacing from a great depth, and the clearing became a place where something enormous was standing in the body of an 11-year-old boy and looking at the wraith of Lord Voldemort with the specific quality of appraisal that something nine-tailed and ancient and furious gives to things it considers beneath contempt. The forest went silent. Every sound died, every rustling thing, every nightbird, the wind in the canopy above. Silence the way silence falls when something at the top of the hierarchy has made itself known. The wraith of Voldemort, diminished, dependent, drinking unicorn blood to keep a body fragment breathing, felt it. And Voldemort, who had not felt fear since he was Tom Riddle and Tom Riddle was young, felt it now. Not fear of Naruto. Fear of what was in Naruto. The enormous contemptuous thing that didn't see a Dark Lord. That saw a ghost and found it small. The wraith backed up. 1 step. 2. The quality of retreat dressed as strategic reposition, Voldemort would not call it retreat, would never call it retreat, but the direction of movement was definitively away, back into the dark of the trees, and the dark received it and then there was nothing in the clearing but the dead unicorn and 3 children and the 15-degree warmth that was slowly, gradually, returning to normal. Hermione exhaled. Harry straightened up from the crouch his pain had put him in, hands still at his forehead, face white in the dark. He looked at Naruto's back. "Are you okay?" Naruto said, over his shoulder. "Still facing the tree line. Still watching. My scar, I know. It'll pass." The heat was ebbing, the warmth settling back to its normal depth, Kurama going back below the surface with the satisfaction of something that has established a boundary and expects it to hold. "It's gone." Harry came to stand beside him. They both looked at the tree line for a moment, at the dark that was just dark now. "That was him," Harry said. "Yeah. He's here. In the school. In Quirrell's, yeah. And the stone, whatever's behind the door on the 3rd floor, he wants it," Naruto said. "To come back. Properly." He finally lowered his wand and turned, and Harry's face was still white but his eyes were steady, which was Harry at his best, frightened and present simultaneously, never one at the expense of the other. "He's not getting it. We should go to Dumbledore," Hermione said. She'd moved to Harry's side, her wand lit now, the lumos making a warm circle around them. Her voice had the quality of someone managing a genuine shake by concentrating on the practical. "We should go right now, tonight, tell him everything, Quirrell, the stone, what just happened, Dumbledore knows," Naruto said. They both looked at him. "He knows about Quirrell," Naruto said. "He knows what's behind the door. He put the protections there himself." He said this without judgment, because the judgment was complicated. Dumbledore was doing something Naruto couldn't see the whole shape of yet, moving pieces in a pattern that had a longer game behind it, and Naruto needed to see more of it before he decided what he thought of it. "The question is whether his plan and our safety point in the same direction." Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "You think Dumbledore would? I think Dumbledore has been doing this for a very long time," Naruto said, "and people who do things for a very long time start to see the people in their plans as part of the plan." Hermione looked like this thought was wrestling with her existing understanding of Dumbledore and winning by a narrow margin. Harry looked like it confirmed something he'd half thought and hadn't wanted to examine. "So what do we do?" Harry said. Naruto looked at the tree line once more. At the dark that held nothing now. Then he looked at his brother, and the answer was the simplest version of the answer, the one that had been true in the Desley cupboard and on platform 9 3/4 and in every corridor and classroom since September. "We make sure we're ready before he tries again," Naruto said. "And we stay together." Firenze appeared at the edge of the clearing. He was different from the centaurs Naruto had glimpsed earlier, younger, paler, with a quality of deliberate choice about his presence here, as though he'd come specifically and decided to be seen. He looked at Harry first, then at Naruto, and then he did the thing, the slight inclination of the head, with more deliberateness than the bay centaur in the trees had managed, more acknowledgement in it. "The wraith has been driven back," Forenza said. His voice was the voice of things that speak because they've decided this specific moment warrants speech, not because talking is a habit. "It will not return tonight." "I know," Naruto said. "You carry something that it remembers." A pause, the specific pause of someone choosing how much to say. "In the old stories, not your world's old stories, older ones, there is a concept. A power held in a person. Power that can consume or protect depending on the nature of the relationship between the holder and the held." His eyes were on Naruto with the quality the centaurs had been using all evening, the recognition of a frequency. "Mars is bright tonight. Your stars are burning, both of you. What is coming will be sooner than the old man plans." Harry said, "What does that mean?" Forenza looked at him with something that was gentle enough to be kindness, for a centaur. "It means that the plans made for you were made without accounting for your brother. And plans that are made without accounting for certain variables become different plans entirely when those variables act." He looked at Naruto again. "The forest knows you. Not because you are what you carry. Because the thing you carry chose you, in this life as in the last, and that choosing goes both ways." Naruto was still. The forest was still. He thought about fragments, ramen and orange and a face he couldn't quite see, a voice that said "You're my person, kid," in every version of this, and the warmth in his chest said nothing, did nothing, only existed with the steady certainty of something that has always been there. "Thank you," Naruto said. Forenza dipped his head once more and turned and was gone into the dark, hooves making less sound than they should. Hermione was looking at the space where he'd been with an expression that had moved clean through surprise and arrived somewhere in the vicinity of odd reconstruction. "Centaurs," she said, "famously do not explain their readings to humans." "I know," Naruto said. "He explained his reading to you." "I know." She looked at him. He looked back. The lumos at the end of her wand made her face warm and serious and very young, and also somehow entirely unafraid of this moment, of this forest, of the fact that Voldemort had been 30 feet from them and then had retreated from the 11-year-old beside her. "How are you so calm?" she asked. Not an accusation, genuine inquiry, the way she asked about things she was trying to understand. "I've had something enormous living in my chest since before I could walk," Naruto said. "You learn to be calm about things. Or you spend your whole life afraid of yourself." "A beat." "That," Hermione said, "is the most sensible thing I've heard anyone say in this forest." They found Hagrid's path by following the sound of his voice. He was telling Neville something encouraging about night soil and its applications in non-magical herbology, which was an extremely Hagrid thing to be doing in the immediate aftermath of a forest detention, and which Neville was apparently receiving with the genuine interest of someone for whom herbology talk was genuinely comforting. Draco was silent, which was a different Draco from the one who'd been at the forest's edge, smaller somehow, the performance of the name and the blood having lost several layers in the dark between the trees. He looked at Naruto when they rejoined the group, and the look had lost something that his looks usually carried. The practiced weight of Malfoy. He was just a boy in a forest who'd been frightened and knew that the person who'd been further into the dark than him had come back steady. He didn't say anything. But he looked. Naruto met the look without making anything of it, which was its own kind of statement. Ron said to Harry, quietly but not quietly enough, "What happened?" "You look like you've seen something," Harry said. "Tell you later." Ron looked at Naruto. Naruto made a small gesture, later, genuinely, not a deflection, and Ron, who was learning to read those, nodded and let it be. Hagrid walked them back to the castle edge, lantern swinging, talking about the forest the way he talked about dangerous things he loved, which was the same way he talked about all the things he loved, with the particular warmth of someone who sees the essential nature of something rather than the surface of it. The children were quiet behind him. At the castle door Hagrid stopped and looked at them all with his enormous honest face. He looked at Harry's white and settled expression and Hermione's careful eyes and Naruto's stillness. "Everything all right?" he asked. He was asking Naruto, mostly, in the way that people ask the person they expect to have the clearest answer. "We're fine," Naruto said. "We saw something." "In the forest?" "The injured unicorn," Naruto said. It was past helping. This was true and also not everything, and Hagrid heard both things and looked at Naruto for a moment with those kind eyes and made the decision that Hagrid always made when given the choice between pressing and trusting. He trusted. "All right," he said, gently. "Get to bed, all of ya." The common room was empty when the three of them got there. The fire had died to embers, the room warm and dim and quiet with the specific peace of a shared space at a late hour. They sat, Naruto on the floor, Hermione on the couch behind him, Harry in the chair that had become his specific chair, the low one by the left window, and stayed quiet for a while in the way that people stay quiet after something that was too large for immediate processing. Harry spoke first. "He knows it's me." He was looking at the embers. "Voldemort." "He looked at me and he knew." "The scar, it was like a connection," Hermione said, carefully. "There's limited literature on surviving Avada Kedavra. But the few accounts that exist suggest that when the curse reflects, it doesn't fully detach. Some residue remains." "Residue," Harry said. "Great. I don't mean to make it sound clinical. She stopped. Started again. I mean that there may be a link between you and him. And if there is, it goes both ways. So he can hurt me through it. And you might be able to feel him through it." She looked at him steadily. "That's not nothing, Harry. That's information." Harry stared at the embers. Naruto watched him do this and then said, "How does your head feel now?" Harry touched his forehead, almost unconsciously. "Better." It stopped when, he looked at Naruto. "When you stepped in front of me." "The chakra," Naruto said. He'd been thinking about this. Whatever Kurama does when he pushes to the surface, it's not just physical. It's like volume. The frequency of something so large it drowns out other signals. "So you can block the connection," Hermione said, sitting forward immediately, because this was exactly the kind of practical implication that her brain latched onto. "If Naruto is near enough, the chakra interferes with the link." "Maybe. I don't know the limits of it. We should test it." At Harry's look, not with Voldemort. With the scar in general. "See if proximity, Hermione." Naruto's voice had the gentle quality of someone who agrees with the instinct and is redirecting the energy. "Tomorrow." She settled back. "Tomorrow," she agreed. But she was already thinking, her hands in her lap doing the small restless motion they did when her brain was running faster than her hands. Harry said, quietly, to no one in particular, "He's actually there. In the school. This whole year." "Yeah," Naruto said. "And Dumbledore knows. And has a plan." "What if the plan is—" Harry stopped. This was the fear underneath all the other fears, the specific one that didn't have a clean shape yet. What if the plan needs something from us that we don't know about yet? Naruto looked at him across the dim room. The emberlight made Harry's face half shadow, the scar just visible on his forehead, that permanent mark of a night he didn't remember. "Then we'll deal with it when we know what it is," Naruto said. "But here's what I know right now, Voldemort retreated tonight. From a clearing, in the dark, from us. Because of what I carry." He leaned back against the couch, hands loose in his lap. "He's not all-powerful. He's desperate. And desperate things make desperate choices." A pause. "We're not desperate. We have time and we have each other and we have," the briefest gesture toward his chest, "assistance." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "Do you ever get tired?" Harry said. "Of being the solid one?" Naruto blinked. Considered this seriously, because Harry's real questions always deserved serious consideration, and this was a real question dressed in a simple wrapper. No, he said, finally. Because it's not a role I put on. It's just, he searched for the language, because language was Harry's thing more than his, Harry who'd found words over the course of this year that he'd never had room for in Privet Drive. I'm not solid because I don't feel things. I'm solid because the things I feel don't surprise me. There's a difference. Harry sat with this. Then, quietly, I want to be like that. You are, Naruto said. You're just still learning you are. Hermione made a small sound, not a word, just the specific frequency of someone who is moved and has decided not to be visibly moved because this is a practical conversation and emotion is not currently the objective. But she made the sound. The next morning Naruto went to the library before breakfast. Not for study, for the same thing Hermione had used the library for, the same instinct, but with different search terms. He wasn't looking for chakra theory or Eastern magical traditions. He was looking for something Forenza had said, old stories. Not your world's old stories. Older ones. He found, in a corner of the restricted section that required creative interpretation of the term restricted, he was there was no teacher stopping him, and the rope was just a rope, not a lock, a book called Primordial Bindings, a survey of pre-arcane energies and their human vessels. It was old enough that the cover had lost its title and he'd found it by the quality of the pull it had when he stood near it, the same way he found other things that mattered, by the fact that Kurama leaned toward it. He sat on the floor between the shelves with the book in his lap. The relevant chapter was 80 pages in, and it was dense, and he was not Hermione so he didn't read it all. He read the first page and the last page and then the middle section where the author seemed to have stopped being academic and started being honest. The author described what they called the tailed unions, historical and mythological accounts of immense natural energies taking forms, taking names, taking hosts. Not possession. Union. The distinction the author drew was careful and important. Possession implied one consciousness overriding another. Union implied two consciousnesses occupying the same body with the possibility of something between opposition and alliance. And at the bottom of the last page of the chapter, in very small print, as though the author had added it afterward and hadn't decided whether to keep it, in all accounts surveyed, the union that achieved something other than mutual destruction was the one in which the vessel chose the energy as much as the energy chose the vessel. The choosing goes both ways, or it goes nowhere. Naruto sat with the book in his lap and the sunlight coming through the library's high windows and the distant sound of breakfast beginning in the great hall, and he thought about a night he didn't remember, a night 11 years ago when something enormous and furious and afraid had crossed some impossible boundary and ended up in an infant who was somehow, impossibly, already reaching toward it. Who had, in the first moments of a new life, done the thing he'd apparently done in another one. Reached first. Offered the bridge. Said, without words, because he didn't have words yet, I'm here. You're not alone. In his chest, the warmth that was Kurama, ancient, arrogant, scarred by a history of being used as a weapon and a political instrument and a burden and a calamity, pulsed once with something that in a smaller creature would have been called tenderness. Naruto closed the book. Put it back on the shelf, in its exact place. Went to breakfast. Snape was waiting outside the library door. Not hiding, Snape didn't hide. Snape stood in places and looked as though he'd always been there and you'd simply failed to notice. He was leaning against the stone wall with his arms folded and his dark eyes watching the library door with an attention that was waiting, specifically, for Naruto. The restricted section, Snape said, requires permission. I know, Naruto said. You were in it without permission. I was. Snape looked at him with the expression that Naruto had catalogued over the year as Snape finding something unexpected and deciding what to do with the information. It happened more around Naruto than around anyone else, which Naruto had decided was probably the best relationship either of them was going to get from each other in the first year, so he'd take it. What were you reading? Pre-arcane energy theory. Tailed unions. Historical accounts. A silence. And? Snape said, with the inflection of someone who knows there's an and. And I think whatever happened the night Voldemort attacked us was a convergence. two things meeting at a point. His magic, and what I carry, and Harry in the middle. He said it simply, without drama, because the drama was in the thing and not in how he said it. I think Dumbledore planned for Harry. I think he didn't plan for me. Snape was very still. That's a significant statement, he said, finally, carefully. I know. Naruto looked at him with the same level attention he'd given him since September, the look that said I see you clearly and you can do the same with me. I also think you've known something was different about me since the first class. And I think you've been trying to decide what to do with that information for 6 months. A very long pause. 50 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in the tone of someone who has lost a negotiation they didn't realize they were in. Naruto blinked. For what? For being annoyingly perceptive. He pushed off the wall. And for your conduct in the Forbidden Forest last night. Naruto went still. You know about last night. I was, Snape said, already moving down the corridor, not looking back, following Quirrell. A pause that was 1 step long. He turned back before the forest. Whatever he encountered at the edge, whatever you encountered in the clearing, was enough to convince him that the stone could wait. He stopped walking but didn't turn. It won't wait forever. I know, Naruto said. Now Snape turned, just slightly. The morning light from a window caught the side of his face and made him, briefly, look like a person rather than a category. The end of the year is coming, Potter. The stone will move. The pieces will move. And when they do, he paused, selecting. Do not wait to be told what to do. He walked away, robes moving in the corridor draft, and disappeared around the corner in the way that Snape disappeared, completely, without diminishing echo, as though the castle had simply absorbed him. Naruto stood in the corridor. He thought about the pieces moving. About the stone, and the corridor, and Quirrell's turban, and the wraith in the clearing backing away from something it hadn't expected to find in a school full of children. He thought about Dumbledore's plan, and the variable in it that hadn't been accounted for, and what that meant when the end of the year came and everything started moving at once. He thought about Harry, who was at breakfast right now, probably eating toast with the focused attention of someone trying to feel normal in an abnormal situation, and Ron who was probably talking about Quidditch to help him, and Hermione who was probably doing both, listening to Ron and thinking about last night simultaneously, because Hermione's brain was large enough to do 2 things at once if both were important. He started walking toward the Great Hall. The castle moved a staircase into his path before he'd consciously decided on his route, which meant either the castle had learned his patterns or the castle was making choices. Either possibility was interesting. Thanks, Naruto said to the staircase, which didn't respond but held steady for him. In his chest, Kurama, who had retreated from the forest with the satisfaction of something that has made itself clear and expects the lesson to hold, turned over in his deep warm place and settled again. Not sleeping. Not quite. More like a very large thing sitting very still, listening to everything, missing nothing. Soon, the warmth said, in no language. I know, Naruto thought back. He walked into the great hall, sat down beside his brother, took a piece of toast from Harry's plate without asking, and listened to Ron explain why the Chudley Cannons were statistically overdue for a title, and the morning was ordinary in all the ways that ordinary mornings are a kindness before the things that aren't ordinary begin. Chapter 4, Underneath the Stone. The exams arrived with the specific cruelty of things that had been approaching for months and still managed to feel sudden. Hermione's response to exams was to become a more concentrated version of herself. The studying, already considerable, became architectural, color-coded, timed, structured with the precision of someone who believes that sufficient preparation makes outcomes predictable. She had a schedule on parchment that Ron looked at once and quietly set back down. She had a revision timetable that accounted for sleep but only just. She had opinions about the most efficient order in which to review subjects that she shared with Harry and Ron whether they'd asked or not, and she was right often enough that arguing felt wasteful. Naruto did not study in the conventional sense. He read things. He thought about them. He sat in the common room in the late evenings and went through his notes not in order but in the order they wanted to be thought about, following the thread of his own understanding rather than the prescribed curriculum, which Hermione found profoundly irritating and profoundly effective in equal measure. He scored consistently well, which she had decided to accept without examining too closely because the alternative was admitting that there were multiple valid learning architectures and she was still building up to that particular concession. Harry studied with Ron, which meant they occasionally actually studied and more frequently quizzed each other in ways that drifted off topic and became conversations about other things, and somehow Harry retained more from this than from the organized approach, because Harry learned by association, by story, by the connections between things rather than the things themselves. They were all, in their various ways, trying not to think about the third-floor corridor. This worked for approximately 2 weeks after the Forbidden Forest and then stopped working entirely on a Tuesday in early June when Hermione arrived at breakfast with the specific quality of barely contained urgency that meant she'd found something and was about to make it everyone's problem. She sat down, looked at the three of them, and said, "The stone is going to be taken tonight." Harry set down his fork. Ron looked up from his eggs. Naruto, who had been eating in the focused and efficient way he ate everything, continued eating but gave her his full attention, which was a Naruto skill that still occasionally unnerved people, the ability to do 2 physical things while actually concentrating on a third. "How do you know?" Harry said. "Dumbledore received an urgent owl this morning. I was in the corridor outside the staff room when the owl arrived. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was waiting for McGonagall about my transfiguration essay, and I heard enough." She had the grace to look slightly guilty about the hearing enough. Only slightly. "He's gone. Left the school." Whatever message it was compelling enough to pull him out on the night before end-of-term exams, which means either it was genuine or, it was designed to look genuine, Naruto said. "Yes." A pause. The Great Hall moved around them, students eating, talking, end-of-year energy, and the 4 of them sat in their small circle of different knowledge and understood that today was not a normal day. "Then we go tonight," Harry said. Simple. Declarative. He'd been getting more like that over the year, cleaner in his decisions, less of the "please tell me I'm right about this" quality he'd had in September. Ron looked at his eggs, then at Harry, then at the eggs, and made the decision that Ron always made when the options were stay here and be safe or go with my friends and probably not be safe. "Tonight," he said, and put down his fork in the definitive way of someone who has eaten his last peaceful meal for a while and intends to have been fed. Hermione said, "Right," and produced a piece of parchment from somewhere on her person and a quill and began writing something. Naruto finished his breakfast. They spent the day pretending to care about exams. This was harder for Hermione than for the others, because she genuinely cared about exams, had cared about them since before she had any context for caring about them, and the knowledge that she was sitting a charms practical at 2 in the afternoon while Quirrell was presumably finalizing his plans for this evening created a cognitive dissonance that expressed itself as aggressive competence. She performed Wingardium Leviosa with such precision that Flitwick squeaked. Naruto sat his exams without drama and without apparent effort and without telling anyone how he'd done, which Hermione found additionally maddening. The afternoon was long. The light through the castle windows had the quality of June at its fullest, long and golden and indifferent to the fact that things of consequence were happening underneath it. Naruto spent an hour on the grounds near the lake, not sitting so much as existing at the water's edge with his shoes off and his feet in the cold grass, thinking about nothing with the disciplined emptiness of someone who has learned that the mind works better when you let it rest before asking it to run. Kurama was close to the surface all day. Not alarmed, more alert, the way large animals are alert before weather changes, the orientation of something that is prepared rather than afraid. The distinction was not subtle from the inside. Tonight, Naruto thought. The warmth shifted, settled, agreed. At 9 in the evening the 4 of them gathered in the common room. The other Gryffindors were doing the end-of-term things, loose and celebratory, the exams done, the year over, the summer audible in every conversation. Percy was attempting to enforce a curfew that no one was observing. Neville was playing Exploding Snap with a Ginny Weasley who was visiting from somewhere she probably wasn't supposed to be. The fire was bright and the room was warm and ordinary. Naruto stood up from his chair and Harry and Ron and Hermione stood with him, and they left. McGonagall's corridor challenge was a giant chess set. The chamber below the trapdoor, reached via Fluffy, who Hermione managed with a whispered musical phrase that she'd researched based on Hagrid's inadvertent comment about music months ago, filing the information then and producing it now with the efficiency of someone who thinks 9 moves ahead, was enormous and cold and made of something that wasn't quite normal stone, with the chess pieces already in their positions on opposite ends. Ron looked at the board for about 15 seconds and Naruto watched him do it, watched the quality of his attention shift from alarm to focus to something that was almost peaceful, the peace of someone operating in their element. "All right," Ron said. "We can get through." But, he looked at the board, working out the geometry. "Someone has to take the place of a piece. 3 of us on the board. 1 watching from the side." "I'll play," Harry said immediately. "Same," Hermione said. Naruto looked at the board. Then at Ron. "You know how to win this." "I think so." A pause. "It's going to, pieces are going to get taken. It's not going to be pretty." "That's fine," Naruto said. "Win it." Ron nodded. He took a breath, looked at the board the way he looked at very good chess problems, with the clarity of someone who has done this 10,000 times in 10,000 iterations, and started arranging them. The game that followed was the kind of chess that non-chess players don't understand the violence of. The pieces moved with the clatter and crash of actual combat, and each time one of their pieces was taken, Harry on his knight, then a rook, then Hermione's bishop retreating, it happened with enough force to make the chamber shake. Ron directed from his position, his bishop's sword in his hand, moving with the calm of someone who had found, here in this chamber of all places, the thing he was actually made for. He gave instructions without hesitation. He sacrificed his own piece, himself, moved deliberately into the path of the White Queen, with the specific deliberateness of someone who knows it has to be this and does it anyway. The White Queen hit him. Ron went down. Not dead, the pieces played to knock out, not to kill, but the force was considerable and he didn't get up. Harry made a sound and moved toward him but Naruto was already there, kneeling beside Ron, one hand on his shoulder, the chakra warmth pushing through the contact point in the way it sometimes did, not healing exactly, more like warmth giving warmth, the kind of contact that says you're not alone, stay with me. Ron's eyes opened. Blurred, unfocused, a gash on his forehead from the fall. He started. Checkmate, Harry said from across the board, the quality in his voice complex enough that Naruto didn't try to summarize it. Ron's eyes closed again, but his face did the thing, the small satisfied thing. Someone has to stay with him, Hermione said. She was standing at the door to the next chamber, the gate that had opened when the board acknowledged the win, and she was looking at Naruto with an expression that was already resolving an argument she hadn't started yet. I'm going, Naruto said. I know. I meant she stopped. The words rearranged. One of us should stay. And another stop. Then, with the honesty that Hermione produced when she'd burned through all her other options, if I go forward I'm going to want to do something and I don't think I can do this particular thing. I can do the logic puzzle. I can do everything up to this point. But what's in there, is mine to do, Naruto said. Not dismissively. Just accurately. And Harry's, she said. And Harry's. She looked at Harry, and the look was the kind of look that says a great deal with no words, and Harry received it the way he received most things from Hermione, not surprised by the depth of it, just quietly understanding. Go to Dumbledore, Naruto told her. Or McGonagall. Someone. Tell them what's happening. We'll handle what's down here. Hermione nodded, once, precise. She looked at Naruto for one more second with an expression he couldn't quite read because it was too many things at once, then she turned and ran back the way they'd come, footsteps fading in the stone. The next chambers fell. Devil's Snare, which Naruto walked through with the chakra warmth on his surface and the plant recoiling from the heat, He'd pulled Harry through first and then stepped through himself, and the snare dropped immediately, all of it, as though he'd asked it firmly to stop. Flying keys, which Harry handled from a broomstick with the instinct of someone born for exactly this kind of three-dimensional problem. Naruto on another broom below him, not as naturally gifted but more than sufficient, finding the right key through the warmth's guidance. There, that one, the damaged wing, before Harry spotted it, and they plucked it from the air together. The troll was already unconscious, which they noted and moved past. Someone had been through here before them. The logic puzzle was a row of potion bottles in front of a wall of purple fire, and a poem on a parchment, and Naruto looked at it for about 40 seconds and picked up the smallest bottle. "The smallest one gets you forward," he said. "The rounded one on the right gets you back." Harry looked at the bottles, at the poem, back at Naruto. "How did you, pattern?" He handed Harry the rounded one. The bottles were small, 1 dose each. Not enough for both of them to continue. This was the design of the thing, the deliberate constriction. "From here, only one goes forward. You go back." "No," Harry said. "Harry, no." And the voice was the voice Harry had been growing into all year, the one with the spine in it, the one that Naruto had always known was there. "I'm not going back. It's me he's after. It's me the scar connects to." "You might be," he stopped. "Reorganized. What if going forward actually needs me? Specifically?" Naruto looked at him. The purple fire crackled. He thought about what Snape had said, when the pieces move, do not wait to be told what to do. He thought about Forenza in the forest, plans that are made without accounting for certain variables become different plans entirely when those variables act. He thought, this variable walks with me. "We both go forward," Naruto said. I don't need the potion." Harry blinked. Naruto stepped into the purple fire. It hit him like pressure, the fire was real, had heat, the magic in it was real, but the chakra met it at the surface and the surface held. He walked through. On the other side he looked back through the purple wall at Harry, who was standing with the small bottle in his hand and an expression that was somewhere between alarm and understanding. Harry drank the potion. He walked through the black fire on the other side, the return fire, not Naruto's direction, and then he was gone. Naruto turned to the last door. He walked through. The mirror of Erist stood in the center of the chamber the way significant things stand, not dramatically, just there, inevitable, taking up the space it needed. The stone was already in someone's pocket. Naruto could feel it, the pull of it, the specific quality of an object saturated with intention, with centuries of accumulated power, the weight of what it could do pressing outward like light. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror. He looked different down here than he did in the classroom, not the nervous, stuttering teacher but something else, something that the teacher had been wearing like a coat and had now set aside. His posture was different. His face had the quality of a person who has been performing diminishment for so long that dropping the performance produces something almost peaceful. He looked at Naruto with Quirrell's eyes and something behind them that was not Quirrell at all. "The other one," Quirrell said. Not Quirrell's voice, flatter, the stutter gone, something underneath that had a different architecture. "I had expected the boy with the scar." "He's coming," Naruto said. He was standing 10 feet inside the doorway, loose and easy, his wand in his hand but not raised, the chakra sitting steady at his surface like armor he'd been wearing since birth and had simply never needed to explain. "What's in the mirror?" Quirrell turned back to the mirror. In it, Naruto could see it from his angle, the reflection, was not Quirrell's image but something shifting, the mirror doing its particular work. Showing someone what they most want. "What I need," Quirrell said. "What my master needs. The stone. He has suffered long enough," Quirrell said, and the voice was doing something, not quite human speech anymore, the architecture of Quirrell's voice carrying a passenger now, the thing on the back of his head speaking more directly. He was the greatest wizard who ever lived. He should not be forced to exist as a parasite, Naruto said. Quirrell turned from the mirror. His face was doing something complicated. You are very young to be so. I'm not going to have this conversation, Naruto said pleasantly. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You're going to step away from the mirror. Harry's going to get the stone. And then this is going to be over. I don't think you understand, you backed away from me in a forest, Naruto said. The quality of his voice hadn't changed. Still easy. Still unhurried. A clearing, 3 months ago. You sent Quirrell to see if it was safe to come back to the stone. He turned around at the edge of the trees because he felt me inside them. He tilted his head slightly. You already know what I am. I'm curious why you think this room changes the calculation. A silence. The chamber was cold. The mirror's surface moved through its slow reflections. The stone in Quirrell's pocket had a pulse to it that Naruto could feel like a second heartbeat. What you carry, said the voice that was more Voldemort than Quirrell now, coming from the back of the turban, from the thing nested there, is not what you believe it is. Tell me, Naruto said, because he was curious and because letting someone talk gives you time to read them. It is a beast. A weapon. It knows destruction, has known only destruction, in every iteration of its existence. What you call guardianship, what you have decided is a relationship, it is an animal following the path of least resistance. A pause. It will consume you when it has nothing left to hate. Naruto looked at him for a moment. Then he said, You're describing yourself. Quirrell's face went very still. Something that wanted more than it had. Something that found a host. Something that calls itself the greatest because it can't think of itself as ordinary, can't survive thinking of itself as ordinary, because if it's not the greatest then what it did to get here was just damage. He kept his voice level, no performance, no cruelty, just the specific honesty of saying a true thing clearly. The difference between you and Kurama is that Kurama actually is enormous. And he doesn't need to prove it. The temperature in the chamber dropped. Not the organic drop of a cold room getting colder. The specific drop of a consciousness that has been hit where it is made of glass and is responding with the only tool it has, which is power without precision, which is rage. Quirrell's hands came up and the magic that came from them was real, real and dark and the particular sharp intention of someone trying to end something quickly, and Naruto moved. He didn't move away. He moved through it. The curse that Quirrell threw caught the edge of his left arm, and the sleeve burned, and there was a bright instant of pain that Naruto noted and then moved past. Pain was information, not an instruction. He closed the distance between them in 4 steps and put his right hand flat on Quirrell's chest. He did not push. He did not throw a spell. He simply put his hand there and let the surface of himself be what it was, the warmth, the heat, the thing in his chest that was vast and ancient and had been awake all evening and had been waiting for this with the patience of something that measures waiting in centuries. Quirrell screamed. Not from pain, or not only from pain. From the specific screaming of a consciousness that has been using a human body as a vehicle and has suddenly encountered something that does not recognize its authority, does not flinch from its history, does not respond to its power with the expected framework of terror or reverence. The parasite on the back of Quirrell's head felt the full weight of what pressed against it from Naruto's palm and understood, for the second time in its existence, what it was to encounter something it could not categorize. Get away from him. This was Kurama. Not words, it was never quite words. But the intention was absolute. Get away from my vessel. Naruto kept his hand pressed there. Quirrell's hands went to his own face and the skin where Naruto's palm had been was, wrong, somehow, blistered and burning with silver light rather than orange flame, and Quirrell folded forward and Naruto stepped back as he fell. The turban unraveled. What was on the back of Quirrell's head was the worst thing Naruto had seen in this life, worse than the wraith in the forest, because that had been diminished and pathetic in its desperation. This was the same thing but closer and more deliberate, a face that was not a face, chalk white and without nose and with eyes that were red as something bloodshot and ancient and furious, and those eyes found Naruto and they burned. You, said Voldemort, and his voice in this form was the voice of something that has stripped away everything that wasn't essential, every social architecture and every pretense and every layer of Tom Riddle's considerable intelligence, and what remained was pure want. You have interfered, yeah, Naruto said. He could feel the stone still. In Quirrell's pocket, in the pocket of the man now lying on the floor. He reached down and took it with the same ease with which he took Harry's toast at breakfast. Just a thing that needed moving, moved. The stone was warm in his hand. Warm in the way living things are warm rather than the way heated objects are warm, some process inside it still running, still doing what it was made to do. He closed his fingers around it. Voldemort's eyes went to his fist. You cannot, the voice started. The door to the chamber opened. Harry came through. He stood in the doorway, breathing hard from the run, and took in the scene, Quirrell on the floor, Naruto standing with something in his closed fist, Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head, the temperature and the darkness and the quality of a chamber that had just been the scene of something, and his face did what Harry's face did in those moments, ran through everything quickly and then arrived at steady. Harry, Naruto said. The mirror. Harry looked at the mirror. His reflection was in it, his actual reflection, Harry as he was, not a wished version, and the mirror made a sound, a deep settling sound like a safe mechanism completing its final turn. And from the mirror's frame, a small seam opened. Harry reached in. He took what was there with the careful fingers of someone who has been told about this specific thing and recognizes it. Another stone. Naruto looked at the one in his hand. Harry looked at the one in his. Two, Harry said. Dumbledore, Naruto said. Not an explanation, a recognition. The plan, or part of it, visible in retrospect, the mirror held a stone for the person who wanted to find it rather than use it. Harry was always supposed to get the one in the mirror. The one in Quirrell's pocket was a secondary protection, a contingency. Two of them had come down here. Dumbledore's plan, designed for one, had produced a different geometry entirely. Voldemort screamed. The scream was the sound of something that has been close to what it wants for an entire year and has just watched the distance between itself and that thing double. Quirrell's body on the floor convulsed, and the face on the back of his head went through something, a leaving, a departure, the specific violence of a consciousness extracting from its host with the urgency of a drowning thing reaching for surface, and then the voice was everywhere and nowhere, a cold wind through a chamber with no windows, and then the wind was gone. Quirrell went still. The chamber was just a chamber, cold stone, a mirror, two 11-year-olds holding warm stones. Harry walked to Naruto and stood beside him and they looked at Quirrell together for a moment. Is he, Harry started. Alive, Naruto said. He could feel the difference, the specific quality of a breathing thing. Unconscious. He'll need help we can't give him. Harry nodded. He looked at the stone in his hand, then at the one in Naruto's. What do we do with them? Naruto thought about this. He thought about Flammel, the old alchemist who'd made the thing, who'd had centuries of life in it and had chosen to end that life when the stone was to be destroyed, and he thought about what the stone actually was, what it meant that it existed, what it meant for every person who might want it if they knew it was real. Give them back, he said. When Dumbledore comes, we give them back. Both of them? It's not ours. Any more than, he paused, looking at his closed fist, the warmth of the stone against his palm. Any more than what I carry is mine, really. You hold something that has its own purpose. You don't get to decide the purpose is yours. Harry was quiet. Then, that's going to be a very mature thing to explain to the Flammels. Probably, Naruto agreed. Somewhere above them, far up through stone and enchantment and the weight of the castle, something moved, the quality of a very large magical intelligence becoming aware of what had happened in its basement. Dumbledore returned. He arrived with the quality that he always arrived with, complete, contained, the full force of him compacted into the space he occupied without spillage. He looked at Quirrell. He looked at the two boys standing in front of the mirror of Eriste with a stone each. He looked at the mirror, which was now dark, its work done. And then he looked at Naruto for a long moment. It was, Naruto thought, possibly the most honest look Dumbledore had given him all year. Not the warm grandfather performance, not the careful management of a resource, just a man of very great intelligence looking at a situation that had not gone the way he planned and taking its true measure. 2, Dumbledore said. 2, Naruto confirmed. The mirror was designed to give the stone to someone who wanted to find it rather than use it. He looked at Harry. You. Then at Naruto. And the one in Quirrell's pocket. I took it, Naruto said. Before he could get back up. Dumbledore studied him. Naruto returned the study without flinching and without the particular deference that adults generally expected from children when adults looked at them in a heavy way. He'd never been good at that specific deference. You confronted him, Dumbledore said. Voldemort. He confronted me, Naruto said. I just didn't retreat. There is a distinction. Yes. Dumbledore's eyes, the eyes that people talked about, the quality of look that made people feel seen and assessed and somehow both things at once, stayed on Naruto for another moment. Then, quietly, with something underneath the words that wasn't quite apology but was in its vicinity, I had not fully accounted for you. I know, Naruto said. Snape told me. A pause. Severus told you. He told me the pieces would move. He told me not to wait. A beat. He was right. Dumbledore looked, briefly, like someone who has had a conversation in absentia that he wasn't prepared for and is revising his understanding of several things at once. I see, he said, in the tone of someone who is seeing more than they'd expected. He held out his hands, one for each stone. Naruto looked at his. Harry looked at his. They both placed them in Dumbledore's palms, one after the other. The old man closed his fingers around them and something in his expression changed, something that had been held tightly for the length of the school year released, a breath finally let out. Nicholas will be glad, he said. And not glad. But at peace, I think. The Flammels are going to, Harry started. Yes, Dumbledore said, simply. But that is what they chose. Long ago. He looked at them both. You are both unharmed. He caught my arm, Naruto said. Earlier. Before Harry arrived. Dumbledore looked at the burned sleeve. Something moved through his expression, not quite guilt, more the specific gravity of someone who placed things in a position of risk and is now accounting for the cost of that placement. Come, he said. The hospital wing. Both of you. The hospital wing was white and quiet and smelled of potions and clean linen, and Madame Pomfrey tutayed over the burned arm with the comprehensive disapproval of someone who treats everyone's injuries as a personal affront. She healed it efficiently and without ceremony, applied something that smelled like winter and made the skin go from tight burn to ordinary in about 2 minutes, and then told them both to sleep. Harry fell asleep almost immediately, the specific sleep of extreme adrenaline leaving a body that has been running on it for hours. He was out between one breath and the next, face slack, the scar on his forehead just a scar in the white ward light. Naruto lay in the adjacent bed and did not sleep. He thought about Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head. The eyes. The specific quality of something that had once been a person and had made a series of choices that removed itself from the category of person, not overnight, not in one dramatic turn, but gradually, piece by piece, sacrifice after sacrifice of everything that wasn't the want, until only the want remained. He thought about what Voldemort had said. It will consume you when it has nothing left to hate. In his chest, Kurama was quiet. Not dormant. The distinction was important and Naruto understood it now the way he understood most things about the old fox, through the texture of coexistence rather than instruction. Not sleeping. Listening. The old fox had heard those words from the Hall of Quirrell's deteriorating consciousness and he had said nothing about them, and the silence was its own kind of statement. He was wrong, Naruto said, quietly, to the dark of the ward. The warmth pulsed. Not agreement, exactly. Confirmation. Like a person who has heard something said about them and doesn't deign to argue because the arguing would give the thing more gravity than it deserved. Naruto laced his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling. He thought about September, first morning at Hogwarts, the Sorting Hat's question. What do you want? He thought about his answer, and whether the year had moved toward or away from it. Harry had friends. Harry had found his voice, unevenly, still learning, but it was his and it was real. Hermione had found a place that fit the shape of her, not just her intelligence but her heart, the part of her that wanted to matter to specific people rather than just be correct in general. Ron had a chess game that had mattered, a sacrifice that had been real, the knowledge of himself that only comes from doing the hard thing when doing it was optional. And Naruto had this. The knowledge of what he was, filling in around the edges, the fragments coalescing. The old fox getting closer to the surface, choosing proximity, choosing this life and this boy the way the book had said, the choosing goes both ways. He heard Harry shift in the next bed. Murmur something. Sleep words, not quite coherent. Still here, Naruto said, quietly. Harry's breathing settled. Naruto closed his eyes. Let the hospital wing hold them both in its white and quiet. Felt the warmth in his chest doing its steady thing, that even pulse that had been there since before he was old enough to understand what it meant and which he understood now was not separate from him, never had been, never would be. Not a burden. Not a weapon. Not a beast awaiting betrayal. A choice made in some impossible space between lives, made again in the first breath of this one, and honored in everything since. He slept. The end-of-year feast happened, and the house cup changed hands in a way that caused significant noise from the Gryffindor table and significant silence from the Slytherin table and an expression from Draco Malfoy that was complicated in the specific way of someone who has been confronted with evidence that their framework needs revision and is not yet ready to begin the revision but can feel it beginning without their permission. Naruto sat between Harry and Ron and ate an amount of food that prompted Hermione to suggest that his metabolism might be another thing worth studying, and he said probably, and she got a look in her eyes that suggested she'd already started. Ron told the story of the chess game 6 times to 6 different people, and each telling was slightly larger than the last, and by the 6th version he'd been outnumbered by at least 40 pieces, which was not technically accurate but was tonally correct. Harry let him tell it and laughed at the right parts and looked at Ron with the specific look of someone who knows the actual version and is glad the better one is the one being told. Neville got 10 points for standing up to his friends, which caused Neville's face to do something extraordinary. Naruto thought about next year. The year after. All the years stretching out from this one like a road visible for only the first stretch of its length, the rest in weather. Voldemort would come back, not this year, maybe not the next, but the quality of that want, the red eyes and the cold wind in the chamber, that was not something that gave up. That was something that waited. But waiting worked both ways. He'd be here. They'd all be here, Harry getting better at choosing himself, Hermione getting better at trusting her heart alongside her head, Ron getting better at knowing that doing the specific thing well was the same as doing the important thing well. And himself, getting better at the thing he was still learning, that the strength of what he carried didn't make him responsible for everything, only for the things in front of him, only for the people he loved, only for the moment where the moment was. You ready? He thought, at the warmth. Kurama's response was not words. It was the equivalent, in the language of enormous ancient things, of a snort. Of course. I'm always ready. I'm a 9-tailed fox. What kind of question is that? Naruto grinned into his goblet. The feast continued. The candles burned warm. Outside the tall windows of the great hall, summer was fully here, and the lake was still, and the forest was its old and complicated self in the long evening light, and somewhere beyond all of it, on a road that had many miles still ahead, something enormous was resting between strides. Chapter 5, The Chamber Speaks. Second year arrived the way second years always arrive, with the specific confidence of people who are no longer new, who know where things are and how things work and have the previous year sitting behind them like a foundation. The first years looked exactly as Harry and Ron and Naruto had looked 12 months ago, slightly overwhelmed, trying not to show it, cataloging everything with the hungry attention of people in a new country. Naruto watched them at the sorting feast and felt something that wasn't quite nostalgia. He was 12, nostalgia seemed premature, but was the recognition of having been that version of himself and knowing what came after it. A great deal came after it, as it turned out. The summer had been its own kind of event. The Dursleys had received them with the specific energy of people who'd had 10 months of relative peace and weren't ready to renegotiate the terms. Naruto had spent the first week systematically making himself so useful, fixing things, cooking meals, gardening with the focused efficiency of someone who doesn't find physical work objectionable, that by the second week even Vernon had stopped manufacturing complaints. Not warmth. Not acceptance. But a kind of grudging functional coexistence, which was better than what Harry had had alone. They'd gotten letters from Ron, from Hermione's parents who were the particular kind of supportive that people who read a great deal tend to be, from the Weasleys who invited them to stay for August and meant it with all of the Weasley-specific wholeness that meant things. They'd gone. The Burrow was the noisiest, most densely alive place Naruto had been in either of his lives, structured chaos held together by Molly's combination of genuine love and organizational authority and Arthur's particular quality of enthusiastic incomprehension of his own world, the magical one, viewing it with the same wonder he viewed the non-magical one's artifacts. Naruto had liked them immediately and completely, which for him was not unusual. He liked most people quickly, saw them clearly, responded to what was actually there rather than what was presented. What was at the Burrow was genuine. It smelled like food and wood and affection and the specific disorder of a large family that had never had enough space or money and had organized itself around the space and money it had with enough love to make the organization invisible. He'd spent 3 weeks there and slept better than he had since September. Now they were back, and the castle was doing its thing, pulling staircases toward him, brightening slightly when he walked through a corridor in a way that might have been the torches or might have been something else, the portraits watching with their specific watching. Kurama was alert in a good way, settled in a new environment that was also a known environment, the Fox equivalent of returning to a territory you've mapped before and finding it as you left it. By October, everything had changed. It started with the voice. Harry heard it first, or rather, Harry was the one who reacted to it first, who stopped in the middle of a corridor during a Death Day party they'd been attending for nearly headless Nick, stopped so suddenly that Ron walked into him and Naruto sidestepped with the reflexes of someone who sees things a beat before they happen. Harry's face had gone to the specific stillness of someone hearing something that shouldn't be audible. "You heard that?" Naruto said. Harry looked at him. "You heard it too?" "No," Naruto said. But he'd felt it, not the voice itself, which was apparently not accessible to everyone in the corridor, but the quality of what it moved through. Like a subsonic thing, below hearing but registering in the body, the specific frequency of something old and powerful and deeply purposeful moving through the castle's infrastructure. What did it say? "Come," Harry paused, his face working. "Come to me. Let me rip you. Tear you." His voice dropped. "Rend. Kill." It wanted to kill something. Ron looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has decided that looking at the ceiling is the appropriate response to this information. "That's terrific. There's a murderous voice in the walls." "It was moving," Harry said. "Moving through the castle. Above us." Naruto turned and looked at the corridor around them. The castle, through the connection he'd been developing all year into something more precise, was doing something different tonight, not its usual settling old stone quality, but a tension, the specific tension of something disturbed. Like touching wood and feeling a vibration that tells you something is happening on the other side of the wall. "Pipes," he said. Hermione, who had been standing very still with the expression of someone running a very fast internal calculation, said, "The plumbing. Old plumbing." A voice that moves through pipes in a castle this old could move anywhere in the castle without being seen. Or something could. They looked at her. "A snake," she said. "A very large snake." The silence had the quality of multiple people arriving at a conclusion and not being pleased with it. "Tomorrow," Naruto said. "Library. The library, and Hermione's thoroughness applied to it, produced Basilisk within 2 weeks. She came to the table with 3 books stacked on top of each other and one open in her hand, reading while walking in the way she sometimes did when the content was too urgent to wait until she sat down, and she put it in front of them and pointed at a passage with the precision of someone who had spent 12 hours finding this specific passage and wanted credit for the finding before explaining its implications. They read it. The Chamber of Secrets. The monster of Slytherin, the legendary beast, the king of serpents, the basilisk, whose gaze killed and whose voice in pipes could mean nothing good. Petrifications, Harry said, because there had been petrifications, Mrs. Norris first, then Colin Creevey, then a small trail of others, all found stiff and pale and eyes open and breathing but not quite present. The school was frightened in the way that schools get frightened when something begins happening that the adults can't explain or stop. It's not killing them. Why isn't it killing them? Indirect sight, Hermione said. The basilisk's gaze kills directly. Indirect, reflections, water, through another creature's eyes, paralyzes. She tapped the book. The ones who were petrified saw it indirectly. That means it's been moving through the school and every time someone's encountered it they've been lucky, Ron said. Or someone's been controlling where it goes, Naruto said. They all looked at him. A basilisk doesn't navigate stone plumbing through a 1,000-year-old castle on its own initiative, he said. Something directs it. Opens the chamber. Sends it out, calls it back. He looked at Harry. The chamber has a air. The writing on the wall, the air of Slytherin. Someone's opening it. But who? Harry said. And where is the chamber? Hermione's expression was the expression of someone who is about to say something that's been bothering them for a while and has just arrived at enough evidence to say it properly. I think I know how to find out, she said. But it's going to require a polyjuice potion and about a month of preparation and the theft of several things from Snape's private stores. A silence. Right, Ron said. Normal Tuesday, then. The polyjuice plan was Hermione's architecture and Naruto executed parts of it with the specific quality of someone who has no particular moral objection to creative rule interpretation when the outcome justifies it. Getting into Snape's stores required the kind of problem-solving that Naruto found straightforward, not deception exactly, more the careful navigation of a system by understanding its gaps. He knew Snape's patrol routes by this point, knew the timing, knew that Tuesday evenings the dungeons were at their emptiest. He was in and out in 4 minutes. Hermione received the ingredients with the expression of someone who is professionally grateful and personally troubled by how smoothly that had gone. You didn't even hesitate, she said. Did you want me to? No. A pause. Yes. She put the ingredients away. You could at least look like it cost you something. It didn't cost me something, Naruto said. It costs you something because you think in terms of rules as structures that hold things together. I think in terms of outcomes. Neither of us is wrong. Hermione looked at him with the expression she was developing specifically for Naruto-related philosophical observations, the one that was simultaneously annoyed and thoughtful. I'm going to think about that for a very long time, she said. I know, he said. The potion brewed in Myrtle's bathroom, a location chosen by Hermione for its guaranteed privacy, since the particular quality of Myrtle's haunting kept even the most determined occupant from staying long. Myrtle herself took a shine to Naruto in the specific way that ghosts sometimes did, something about his presence registered differently to things that were between states, and she would materialize near him occasionally and talk at length about her death, her grievances, the inadequacies of living people generally, and he would listen with the same genuine attention he gave to everything, which she found extraordinary because most living people did not listen to her at all. You're the only one who doesn't find me depressing, she told him, hovering near his shoulder while he stirred the potion. You're not depressing, Naruto said. You're sad. There's a difference. Sad things happen to you. That's not the same as being a depressing person. Myrtle looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been called depressing by so many people for so many years that the alternative required significant processing. She started. She dissolved into happy sobbing and submerged. Hermione looked at where Myrtle had been, then at Naruto. You made a ghost cry. Positively. She needed to, Naruto said, and kept stirring. The heir of Slytherin, when the Polyjuice plan produced its answer, was not what any of them expected. Harry and Ron went in as Crabbe and Goyle, an experience that Harry later described as deeply uncomfortable on multiple levels, while Hermione remained in the bathroom having an unexpected and extended interaction with cat hair and what it did to Polyjuice Potion when the human hair was actually cat hair. Naruto did not go in as anyone. He stationed himself in the corridor outside the Slytherin common room entrance with the ease of someone who has excellent reasons for being where they are and is confident in them, watching, listening, available. He heard enough. Draco Malfoy did not know who had opened the chamber. This was clear from what Harry and Ron brought back, the genuine bewilderment underneath Draco's relish of the chaos, the way he talked about the chamber with the proprietary pride of someone who valued the legend but not the means, the specific note of someone who wished he was the heir but genuinely wasn't. Naruto sat with this information in the bathroom afterward, Hermione recovering, for receding, Harry explaining, Ron being suppressed about the general experience, and thought about what it meant. It's not a student, he said. They looked at him. Draco doesn't know. He'd know if it was a student, that kind of thing gets around in Slytherin House, the right people know. So it's not a student operating on their own initiative. He worked through it the way he worked through most things, forward, in sequence, following the thread. But it's something connected to a student. Something acting through a student without the student necessarily knowing. A possession, Hermione said, from her cot, sounding better. Or something like it. He thought about Quirrell. About the specific quality of something wearing a person. Not the same as last year. This is, older. More deliberate. Voldemort again. Ron said. A piece of him, Naruto said. I think. The quality of silence that followed this had the particular density of information settling into people's understanding and changing the shape of it. By February, 3 more people had been petrified and the school had developed the anxious, compressed atmosphere of a place under siege. Pairs in corridors, mirrors being carried, the magical equivalent of all the lights on and nobody going out alone. Hagrid was under visible strain, Dumbledore's presence in the castle having the quality of reassurance that required constant maintenance to remain effective. McGonagall held the school together with the specific authority of someone who has decided that the school will continue to function and has made this decision irrevocable by sheer force of character. Naruto walked the castle alone sometimes at night. Not breaking curfew for the drama of it, he moved with the castle's permission, which was different. The staircases cooperated. The torches stayed lit. He walked the older parts of the building, the sections that predated the organized magic of the later centuries, feeling the bones of the place, the deep structure of what Hogwarts actually was underneath the school it had become. He was looking for the chamber. Not with maps, not with research, though he'd read Hermione's research, absorbed the relevant sections, filed the architecture. He was looking with the internal compass, the one that had found the third-floor corridor by the pull of it, the one that had known in the forbidden forest which direction the wraith was before it was visible. He walked the castle and let the warmth in his chest orient him the way a compass orients a needle, and night by night he got closer to something that the castle was keeping from him, not maliciously but structurally, the way a castle keeps its oldest secret in its oldest stone. He was close when Ginny Weasley disappeared. The message on the wall said her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. It was written in something that wasn't paint, and the color of it made several teachers look away, and Filch's cat was petrified nearby and Filch was, smaller, somehow, than usual, the viciousness temporarily suspended in something closer to grief, and Naruto stood in the corridor and looked at the message and felt the compass in his chest pull sharply downward and to the left. Harry was beside him. They'd been together when McGonagall sent the students back to their dormitories and they'd simply not gone, which under normal circumstances would have been addressed by now, but the teachers had larger concerns. Ron was down the corridor, pale and speaking to nobody, running through options with the specific quality of someone whose thinking is powered by fear, not for themselves but for the smaller red-haired girl who had been folding into herself all year while the chamber was happening and who was now gone. "Harry," Naruto said. Harry looked at him. "I know where it is." "A beat." "How long?" Harry started. "I've been finding it for 2 months, Naruto said. "I'm close. Tonight close." He looked at his brother steadily. "I'm going." Harry said. Not a correction. A statement. Naruto agreed. They got Ron, who stopped his pacing with the alacrity of someone who needed a direction and had just been given one, and found Lockhart, not by choice, but because Lockhart found them, materializing from a classroom doorway with his wand out and an expression that was doing its best impression of decisive courage and not quite arriving. Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, Defense Against the Dark Arts, who had spent the year being simultaneously decorative and insufficient, who had the specific quality of someone whose reputation had been built from someone else's lumber. Naruto had clocked him in September and filed him as not malicious, not useful, entirely interested in himself, and had left it there. Lockhart informed them with the air of someone making a difficult confession that he had no idea how to find the chamber. Naruto informed him, with the air of someone who does, that he was coming with them. Lockhart attempted to take control of the situation and failed in the specific way that people with no actual authority fail when they attempt to wield the performance of it. "Walk in front of me," Naruto told him, pleasantly. "So I can see what you're doing." Lockhart walked in front of him. Moaning Myrtle told them about the sink. She told Naruto specifically, because she would tell Naruto things she wouldn't tell other people, and when he asked her, gently, with the same quality of listening that he'd always given her, how she'd died, she described it, the eyes. Something in the pipes. The bathroom. The specific sink that had always seemed odd. Naruto looked at the sink. The compass pulled hard. "Here," he said. Harry crouched next to it, examined the tap, and then said something in Parseltongue. Naruto felt the sound of it before he understood it was language, a frequency that moved differently from English, from any human language, something that resonated in the castle's stone like a tuning fork hitting the right note. The sink moved. The floor moved. A pipe descended into the dark below with the kind of unhurried engineered certainty that suggested Salazar Slytherin had built this to last. Lockhart attempted to get behind them. Naruto stepped aside very specifically to prevent this. They went down. The pipe was long and dark and deposited them in a chamber that smelled of deep water and old stone and something reptilian, the specific cold dry smell of a very large serpent's territory. Bones on the floor. Shed scales the size of dinner plates catching the dim light. Naruto stood in the landing rubble and let his eyes adjust and felt the warmth in his chest sit up in the way it did when it was paying attention. Lockhart stood behind them and did something. There was a bang and a rush of light and a section of ceiling came down and Naruto was already moving. He had his hand on Harry's collar and pulled him sideways before the rocks hit, taking the impact on his shoulder and his arm, and they came up from the rubble crouch with Naruto checking Harry first and then looking at where Lockhart was now sitting in the middle of scattered stones with an extremely confused expression. "What happened?" Lockhart said. "Ron, from behind the collapse, coughing, the memory charm, it backfired." Naruto looked at Lockhart, who was blinking at his hands with the bewildered openness of someone who has had every practiced persona removed simultaneously and is experiencing their first genuinely blank moment in years. He looked young without it. Harmless. Just a person who'd wanted things for not very good reasons and had found ways to get them that had costs he'd declined to examine. "Ron," Naruto said, through the gap in the collapse. "I'm fine," Ron's voice, somewhat rocky with dust. "I'll try to move some of it from this side. You go find Ginny." "Harry goes with me," Naruto said. "Lockhart stays on your side." "Got it." A pause. "Be careful." "We will," Harry said. Naruto looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something passed between them in the look that needed no particular language. They went further in. The Chamber of Secrets proper was the first thing Naruto had seen in this life that looked like something from the other one. Not exactly, the specific architecture was Hogwarts Slytherin, stone and serpent motifs and the damp of a chamber that sat below a lake. But the scale of it, the quality of design significance, of a space built for something enormous, that resonated with something in the fragment memories. Pillars and serpent columns and the darkness above disappearing into a vault that was too high to see. Ginny was at the far end. On the floor. Still. Harry ran. Naruto ran with him, and they slid to their knees beside her, and Harry had his hand on her cheek and then her wrist and then he said, "She's alive, she's breathing," and the quality of relief in his voice was so complete it was almost physical. "She won't be for long." The voice came from beside the stone face at the end of the chamber, and it came from a boy who was not quite there, the quality of him, the luminescence, the way the light around him didn't work quite right. Tom Riddle. 16 years old. Made of something that wasn't life but was the performance of life, the borrowed animation of something that has fed on enough of a real person's energy to approximate existence. He was handsome in the specifically designed way of someone who understood appearance as a tool, dark-haired, arranged, with eyes that were intelligent and empty in the specific way of someone who stopped being genuinely curious about other people some time ago and retained curiosity only as a technique. He held a wand. Harry's wand, picked up from the floor. Naruto looked at him and Kurama leaned toward the surface with the recognition of something identifying a known category. Like Voldemort in the forest. Like Quirrell's passenger. A piece of the same thing, younger, more formed, more dangerous for being less diminished. Tom Riddle, Naruto said. Tom's eyes moved to him. They'd been on Harry, assessing, with the quality of a cat watching something it's decided about already. They moved to Naruto and the assessment restarted from the beginning. "The other one," he said. The same thing Quirrell had said in the chamber below the school. "You weren't in the plan." "I've been hearing that a lot," Naruto said. "You're not like him." Not dismissively, genuinely observational, the intelligence behind the eyes working. The lightning scar, the famous connection, the chosen child, that's him. "You're something different." He tilted his head. "What are you?" "His brother," Naruto said simply. "That's not what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking." Naruto walked toward him. Not fast, not dramatic. Just walking. "And you already know the answer, because you're a piece of Voldemort and Voldemort backed away from me in a forest last June." He stopped about 15 feet away. "The question is whether you're going to make the same decision faster or slower." Tom Riddle looked at him with eyes that had the intelligence of someone who had been, in life, genuinely exceptional and the emptiness of someone who had used that intelligence exclusively in service of things that made a person smaller. He looked at Naruto walking toward him and he did a calculation. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "No. Everyone is afraid of me." "I know." Naruto held his eyes. "That's how you know what you are." "By who's afraid of you?" "It's been that way since you were at the orphanage." He watched Tom's face tighten, the first real crack in the arrangement. "You made people afraid because people afraid of you confirmed what you were. The most powerful. The most dangerous. The one that mattered." He paused. "Must be strange, meeting someone who isn't." Tom's hand tightened on Harry's wand. "You're trying to destabilize me." "I'm trying to talk to you," Naruto said. "There's a difference. I talked to Voldemort the same way. In the forest, in the chamber under the school. He didn't want to hear it either." He looked at Tom, at the luminescence of him, the stolen life. "You're dying. You know that. Whatever you've drawn out of her, a look at Ginny, on the floor, it's not enough. You're a page of a diary. You're not going to be him, whatever you try." "I will be more than him," Tom said, and the voice had dropped its conversational quality and was something colder underneath. "I will be what he should have been. Without weakness. Without half measures. Without the attachment that destroyed him. The attachment that destroyed him, Naruto repeated. You mean his fear, Tom said. He feared you. Whatever you carry. He encountered it and he retreated and then came back later and retreated again. That's what attachment to survival produces, strategic cowardice dressed as patience. The empty eyes were on Naruto with the full force of what Tom Riddle's intelligence had once been, when it was alive. I don't retreat. Then we have a problem, Naruto said, because this was true and also because the distance between them was now 10 feet and he needed Tom to be focused on him and not on the girl on the floor. Tom raised Harry's wand. The basilisk came. It came from the stone face at the end of the chamber, from the carved serpent mouth, 60 feet of king of serpents, scales the color of old copper and dark water, filling the chamber with the physical reality of something that had been living in the pipes of Hogwarts for 1,000 years. The sound of it was enormous, the movement of it displacing the air, the specific weight of a body that large in motion making the floor shudder. Naruto closed his eyes. Tom made a sound of satisfaction and turned away from him, dismissing the challenge, confident in the mathematics. Even Naruto couldn't fight what he couldn't look at. Naruto had his eyes closed. His eyes stayed closed. He stood with his eyes closed in the Chamber of Secrets and put both hands flat at his sides and felt the warmth in his chest move from its surface presence to something else, something that rose from the deep place not urgently but inevitably, the way a tide rises, the way a very large fire builds from its center outward. The temperature in the chamber rose. The dark behind his eyelids went red-gold. The basilisk stopped. Not because it was commanded. Not because Naruto had spoken to it, he wasn't a Parselmouth and had no claim on its specific obedience. It stopped because the thing it was moving toward had become, in the last 3 seconds, something that every instinct the basilisk had developed over 1,000 years of being the apex predator in its particular environment said was not prey. Was not equivalent. Was in a different category entirely. Naruto felt the basilisk's presence through the darkness behind his closed eyes, enormous, old, cold-blooded in every sense, its consciousness a simple flat thing compared to the fox's vast complex one. He felt Kurama reading it, the old fox assessing the snake with the comprehensive contempt of something that has been the strongest thing in every room it has ever occupied. Back, Kurama said. Not in any language. In frequency. In the specific register that said I am larger than you and you know it. The basilisk retreated into its tunnel. Tom Riddle turned back to find Naruto standing in the same spot with his eyes still closed, the chamber 15 degrees warmer than it had been, and the 60-foot king of serpents nowhere to be seen. The emptiness in Tom's eyes became something else. Not fear, or not only fear. Something more complex. The look of someone encountering evidence that requires them to revise a fundamental assumption, and that look, on Tom Riddle's specific face, was the most human thing Naruto had seen on it. Naruto opened his eyes. Your turn, he said. Harry, across the chamber, had found a hat. The sorting hat, arrived, delivered, dropped, the mechanics unclear, with a sword inside it. Gryffindor's sword. Harry pulled it out with the effort of someone pulling something that was testing him deliberately and finding him, just barely, sufficient. He turned to face Tom with the sword in his hand and the expression he'd been growing into all year. Tom raised the wand. Harry moved. What followed was not a fight in the cinematic sense, it was Harry, who was 12 and not a sword fighter, moving on instinct and courage rather than technique, and Tom Riddle, who was a page of a diary and whose connection to physical reality was dependent on Ginny's diminishing life force, and the specific geometry of the chamber, and the sword, and the diary on the floor. The sword went through the diary. Once, twice, with the specific determination of someone who has understood what needs to be done and done it without overthinking the doing. Ink like blood from the punctures, too dark, too wrong. Tom Riddle screaming, coming apart from the edges, the luminescence failing, the intelligence in those eyes encountering the specific terror of oblivion and finding, in the last moment, that it was afraid. Naruto watched him go with the same quality he'd watched Voldemort's wraith retreat in the forest, the assessment of something looking at something smaller than itself, not with satisfaction and not with cruelty, but with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a natural conclusion. Tom Riddle dissolved. The chamber was quiet. Ginny woke up gasping, and Harry dropped to his knees beside her, and she was confused and cold and shaking, and Harry talked to her in the voice he used with people who were frightened, the careful quiet one, and Naruto stood a few feet away and let Harry do this because Harry was good at it and because Ginny needed Harry right now specifically. She'd been carrying Tom Riddle's weight all year and hadn't known it, and the hands she needed were Harry's hands, which were holding hers, steady. Something moved in the chamber. Naruto turned. The basilisk had come back. Not fully, it was emerging again from the stone face, slowly, and its eyes were open, and Naruto was facing it and his eyes were open and, he moved. He moved fast, sideways, and the petrifying gaze crossed the space he'd occupied without finding him, but found, instead, the sword. The reflection in Gryffindor's sword, held out by Harry, who turned instinctively, the reflection of those terrible eyes turned back on themselves. The basilisk recoiled. And in its recoil, Harry moved. He moved forward, which was the Harry thing, the move toward it thing, the thing that Naruto had watched him doing all year with increasing confidence and decreasing need for permission, and the sword connected, driving up into the roof of the basilisk's mouth, and the basilisk fell, and a fang went through Harry's arm as it fell, and Harry went down with it. Naruto was there before Harry hit the ground. He caught his brother's weight and lowered him carefully, the chamber floor cold beneath them, and looked at the fang in Harry's arm with the assessment of someone who knows injuries and knows bad ones and knows this is in the second category. The fang was basilisk. Basilisk venom. Naruto, Harry said. His voice was steady, which was the frightening kind of steady. I'm here. It's in my arm. The venom, Hermione said. I know what she said, Naruto said, and the warmth in his chest was at the surface immediately, was pressing through his hands where they were on Harry's arm with the urgency of something that does not lose the things it has decided to keep. Stay awake. I'm trying, Harry said, and looked at his arm, and looked at Naruto. Can you? Yes, Naruto said, before Harry finished, because the answer was yes and the time for everything else was later. He pressed both hands to Harry's arm, the venom spreading dark and visible in the veins from the puncture point, and felt Kurama respond to this with something that transcended all the complicated history of what the fox was and had been and had decided to be in this life, something that was simpler and more fundamental than any of it. Mine, Kurama said. And meant the boy. And meant the protection of the boy. And meant that the venom was not welcome in this space and would not be permitted to do what it intended. The heat that moved from Naruto's hands into Harry's arm was not comfortable. Harry made a sound through his teeth and his eyes went wide, but the dark in the veins reversed. Not instantly, not magically clean, but reversed, the venom pulling back from the spreading edge, the warmth doing what the warmth had always done, which was exist at a temperature that toxins and dark magic and ancient malevolence could not comfortably maintain themselves within. Something else arrived. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, came in a burst of flame and song, and the song did what phoenix song always does, it made the darkness in the room reorder itself, made the difficult things seem survivable, made the fading things find their edges again. The phoenix landed on Harry's arm, beside Naruto's hands, and cried, and the tears went into the wound, and the dark in the veins retreated to nothing. Harry exhaled. Long complete. Naruto didn't move his hands for another 10 seconds. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at his brother. Harry looked back. The color was returning to his face. The arm looked worse than it was, now, the puncture closing, the skin around it flushing with the aftermath of healing rather than the progress of poison. Thank you, Harry said, quietly, to Naruto specifically. Don't thank me, Naruto said. Thank the giant pigeon. Fawkes made a sound of profound dignity. Ginny laughed, surprised, exhausted, slightly hysterical, entirely genuine, and the laugh echoed in the stone chamber and bounced off the serpent pillars, and it was the best sound the chamber had heard in 1,000 years, which was not a difficult standard to meet but counted regardless. They got out. Fawkes carried them, all 4 of them, which should have been impossible and wasn't, because Phoenix physics operated on different principles than anyone had fully documented. They came up through the pipe and through the bathroom and into the corridor, and the school received them with the alacrity of a place that had been holding its breath. Dumbledore met them outside McGonagall's office and looked at them the way he'd looked at them in the chamber under the school last June, with an assessment that ran deep and quick and arrived at something that required revising his existing understanding. He looked at Harry's arm. He looked at Naruto. He looked at Ginny, who was being held upright by the combined efforts of Ron on one side and Percy on the other, Percy having apparently abandoned his usual composure completely and gone pale in a way that made him look 12. He looked at the basilisk fong that Naruto was carrying. That was from the basilisk, Naruto said, and handed it to him with the ease of someone who picked up dangerous things and carried them because they were useful. Thought someone should have it. Dumbledore took the fong carefully. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, to Naruto, very quietly, "You drove the basilisk back." "Yes. 1,000-year-old king of serpents." "It didn't want to push past what was in the way," Naruto said. "So it didn't." Dumbledore was quiet with this. He had the quality of a man reassembling a picture from pieces that kept coming in a different order than he'd expected. "The diary," he said. "Tom Riddle's diary. You understood what it was. A piece of him. Stored. Like a copy that could grow." He looked at Dumbledore carefully. "There could be more of them." Another quality silence. "Yes," Dumbledore said, in a voice that was carrying more weight than it usually did. "There could be." He looked at Naruto, and for just a moment the warmth and grandfather quality was entirely absent, and what was there instead was the man himself, old, very powerful, carrying things for a very long time and sometimes doing it imperfectly. "You're ahead of my timeline, Naruto." "I know," Naruto said. "Does that concern you?" Naruto thought about this. About the chamber, about the basilisk, about Tom Riddle dissolving. About Harry's arm and the venom reversing and Kurama's wordless certainty about what was permitted and what wasn't. About a year of watching things move toward his brother and positioning himself between. "No," he said. "It concerns Voldemort." "That's fine." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in the look was something that Naruto couldn't quite read, respect, and wariness, and the specific emotion of someone who has spent a lifetime being the most consequential person in the room and is doing the arithmetic of what changes when that's no longer unconditionally true. "Indeed," Dumbledore said, very quietly. "I imagine it does." The school celebrated the end of the threat with the specific relief of pressure released, loud and immediate and slightly chaotic, the great hall filling with noise and the petrified students restored by the Mandrake draft, and the year tilting toward its conclusion with the sense of something narrowly but genuinely survived. Naruto sat with Harry and Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and ate an amount of food that was consistent with having done what they'd done and needing the resources to recover from it, and Ron talked and Hermione said things that were relief wearing the clothing of observations, and Harry sat beside Naruto with the steadiness of someone who has been frightened and is on the other side of it. "The diary could be destroyed," Harry said, quietly, in a gap between Ron's commentary. "Tom Riddle could be destroyed. But the real Voldemort, different," Naruto said. "More." "Yes." Harry thought about this with the thoughtful seriousness he brought to real things. "He's going to keep coming back. One way or another. Until someone," he stopped. "Until someone finishes it," Naruto said. And then, with the same quality of simplicity he brought to the things that mattered most, "We'll be ready." Harry looked at him. "Both of us." "Both of us," Naruto confirmed. "And Hermione, who will have read everything relevant in advance. And Ron, who will sacrifice his chess piece at the exact right moment." He looked at them, Ron mid-sentence, Hermione mid-thought, the table full of people who had been through a year together and come out the other side still here. "We have time. And we have each other. That's enough." In his chest, Kurama was warm and present, and, there was no other word for it, content, in the grudging and hard-won way of something that has chosen its place and knows it chose correctly, even if choosing correctly was annoying and would continue to be annoying, and this was not a complaint it intended to withdraw. Harry looked at the table of people around them. At Ginny, down the end, quietly eating with the slightly absent quality of someone still finding their way back to themselves. At Neville, who was telling someone about herbology with the confidence of someone who has found that confidence in one area tends to leak into others. At the castle, visible through the windows, the grounds in spring, the forest at the edge of it dark and full and patient. Yeah, Harry said. It is. The feast went on. The candles burned. The year turned toward its close with the sense of something that had been tested and had held, and outside, the ground sat quiet in the spring evening, and in the chamber below everything the basilisk lay still, and Tom Riddle was nothing and Ginny Weasley was alive, and the sword of Gryffindor had been returned to the hat, and the hat had been returned to the headmaster's office, and the diary was ash. And in the deep stone place below the lake, something ancient and vast and many-tailed turned over in its warm place and watched its vessel laugh at something Ron said, and did not call it satisfaction, and felt it anyway. Chapter 6. What Fear Looks Like. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in July. Not an owl, they'd have seen an owl coming. This letter arrived the way things arrived when someone with significant magical ability wanted to be certain it reached its target without interception, folded into the bill of a nondescript sparrow that landed on the burrow's kitchen windowsill, tapped 3 times, deposited a sealed envelope, and left. The envelope was addressed to both of them. Harry Potter and Naruto Potter, in handwriting that was controlled and deliberate and told you something about the person who'd written it, someone who thought carefully about presentation and had been doing it for a long time. Arthur Weasley recognized the ministry seal on the back before he recognized anything else, and the quality of his face as he handed it to Harry told them both that ministry-sealed letters arriving at the Burrow in July were not the standard content of summer mornings. Harry read it first. Then Naruto. The letter was from a man named Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, and it was polite in the aggressive way of official correspondence that is attempting to accomplish something while maintaining deniability about the fact that it is attempting anything. It informed them, with the warmth of a form letter and the specific intention of a targeted one, that the Ministry of Magic was committed to ensuring the safety of all prominent wizarding citizens, particularly those of significant public interest, and that arrangements had been made for a brief and entirely voluntary meeting at the Ministry on the 15th to discuss, and here the language went careful, current security considerations in light of recent events. Naruto set the letter on the table. No, he said. Harry looked at him. It's not a request, Naruto said. It's dressed as a request so that declining it looks like the unreasonable option. But the thing underneath it is, they want to look at us. Assess us. Figure out how much of what happened at Hogwarts is verified and how much is manageable. He turned the letter over, looked at the seal. They're scared. Not of Voldemort, they've decided Voldemort is gone, because that's easier. They're scared of us. Of 2 12-year-old boys who keep surviving things that aren't supposed to be survivable. Arthur was quiet for a moment, his hands on his tea mug, his face doing the particular thing it did when he was being careful with information. That's a fairly thorough reading, Naruto. Am I wrong? A pause that was longer than it needed to be. No, Arthur said. Not entirely. He looked at them both with the expression of a man who cares about them and also inhabits the institution being discussed and understands both things are true simultaneously. Fudge is, he's not a bad man. He's a frightened one. Which sometimes produces the same outcome as a bad one, from the outside. What does he actually want? Harry said. To know what you know. Whether it represents a problem for the current order. Arthur set down his mug. The ministry has been, let's say reluctant, to accept certain information about last year. About what happened in the chamber. About what happened in the first year. There are people there who would prefer that the narrative remained manageable, Naruto said. The word from the letter. Yes. We'll go, Harry said. Naruto looked at him. We have nothing to hide, Harry said. And if they want to look at us, let them look. He looked back at Naruto steadily. Besides. I want to see what they do when they actually have to talk to us directly. Naruto thought about this for about 2 seconds. Then he smiled, slow and certain. The smile that Ron had once told Hermione made him look like he knew something about the next 3 moves and was interested to see if you'd catch up. Yeah, he said. All right. The 15th arrived overcast and deliberate, the sky doing the specific British summer thing of threatening rain without committing to it. They flew to the ministry, Harry still slightly uncertain with flu powder after a year of practice, Naruto landing clean, and emerged into the atrium with its golden fountain and its rushing people and its quality of organized self-importance. Hermione had insisted on being briefed. She'd owed them 4 pages of notes about the ministry's structure, Fudge's political history, the relevant legislation around underage wizard rights and what the ministry could and could not legally request of minors, which she'd organized in the order of most likely relevance and annotated in red ink where she felt particularly strongly. She'd wanted to come. They'd told her she couldn't, this one was theirs, and she'd sent 6 more pages of notes in response. Naruto had read all of it. A ministry official met them at the fountain, young, smooth-faced, with the energy of someone whose job was to be pleasant on behalf of people who couldn't be bothered to be pleasant themselves. He introduced himself as something with several syllables and an esquire at the end and shook their hands with the careful firmness of someone who'd been told to project authority without provoking it. He led them through the atrium, into the lifts, and Naruto watched the ministry move around them as they went, the memos, the rush of people, the particular way an institution looks from the inside when you're not part of it and can see it clearly for that reason. He watched people recognize Harry. He watched them try to figure out what to do with Naruto, who was not the famous one but who occupied space in a way that made them keep looking. They were taken to a conference room, not Fudge's office, which told Naruto something about how the minister wanted the meeting to go, neutral territory, the performance of informality. Fudge was already there, standing at the head of a table, with 2 other people seated at his sides. A woman with a face like a toad wearing the expression of a toad who has been given administrative authority and found the experience validating. And a man Naruto didn't recognize, who had the particular quality of someone who thought in operational terms, who looked at the boys when they came in and made an assessment that was precise and rapid and professional. Naruto assessed him back, in kind. Harry, Fudge said, with the warm authority of someone who considers first-name familiarity a strategic tool. And, Naruto. A half-beat of uncertainty on the name, as though he'd practiced it and it had still come out slightly wrong. Please, sit. Tea. No thank you, Harry said. I'm fine, Naruto said. They sat. The woman with the toad face looked at them with the specific quality of evaluative dislike, not personal yet, but professional, the dislike of someone who has already decided what outcome they want and is assessing the obstacles. She was introduced as Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary. The man was Percy Knott, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and he looked at Naruto for a fraction of a second longer than could be accidental. Wonderful to finally meet you properly, Fudge said, settling into his chair with the energy of a man performing ease. His robes were lime green, which Naruto filed as a detail about him. Someone who made visible choices about appearance had specific things they wanted those choices to communicate. 2 remarkable young men. 2 remarkable years. Thank you, Harry said, with the courtesy he'd developed, the polished surface of it, under which was Harry. We've had some extraordinary reports, Fudge continued. Extraordinary. A troll, a philosopher's stone, a basilisk. He paused, his phrasing selecting itself with visible care, encounter with a certain entity in the forest during your first year. Voldemort, Naruto said. The room shifted. Fudge blinked. Umbridge's expression tightened. Knott looked at Naruto with the same rapid precision. We prefer, Umbridge said, in a voice like pink icing over something that wasn't a cake, to use more careful language. You know who is understood to be, gone. Naruto said. Gone, she confirmed, with the satisfaction of a word placed correctly. He possessed a teacher at Hogwarts last year, Naruto said. That teacher died as a result. Voldemort's wraith was in the Forbidden Forest. His imprint was in a diary that spent a year directing a basilisk through the school's plumbing and draining a 12-year-old girl's life force. He said all of this at the same pace he said everything, not aggressively, not performing bravery, just saying things that were true because they were the things to say. Calling him gone doesn't make any of that not have happened. Fudge was red around the collar. We appreciate the candor. However, the current official position is a liability, Naruto said. Not because it's dishonest, though it is. Because it's strategically wrong. If he's coming back, and he is, the ministry being officially unprepared is the worst possible outcome for everyone in this room. Harry said nothing. He was watching Naruto with the focused attention of someone seeing a performance and knowing the performer and understanding that this is not, in fact, a performance. Umbridge said, "That is a remarkable claim for a 12-year-old. 13, Naruto said. As of last month. Her mouth went thin. May I ask, Not said, and his voice was the first genuinely calibrated thing in the room, careful, professional, without the political loading of Fudge or the administrative offense of Umbridge, about the nature of your abilities. Specifically. You may ask, Naruto said. The reports from Hogwarts described something in excess of standard magical capability. Something that affected a basilisk. Something that, not looked at his notes with the practiced ease of someone who doesn't actually need their notes but uses them to pace a conversation, appears in multiple witness accounts as a physical phenomenon. Heat. Light. Something described variously as red energy, an overwhelming pressure, and, from one centaur in the Forbidden Forest, as, he looked up, the old power, walking again in a new skin. The room was quiet. It's not ministry magic, Naruto said. Not defensively. Just accurately. No, not agreed. What is it? Naruto considered him. Not was the most honest person in this room, the only one whose agenda was actually information rather than the management of information. Something that crossed over with me. From another life, maybe. Something that chose to be here. He kept Not's eyes. It's not dangerous to anyone who isn't a threat. It doesn't answer to the ministry. And it has no interest in being categorized, regulated, or used. Not looked at him for a long moment. That's not the most reassuring framing. It wasn't meant to reassure you, Naruto said. It was meant to be accurate. If it can't be regulated, Umbridge started. Then you don't regulate it, Naruto said. Same as you don't regulate the sun. It exists. It does what it does. You build around it. Umbridge's face went to a color that wasn't pink. The ministry, she said, in the voice of someone drawing on significant reserves of controlled anger, has an obligation to. I know what the ministry's obligations are, Naruto said. I've read Hermione's notes. I know what you can and can't request of minors under current legislation. I know what a restrictions order requires in terms of evidence and process. I know what the Wisengamot's framework says about entities of non-standard magical classification. He let this settle. I came here in good faith to have an honest conversation. I'm happy to keep having it. But if the conversation is actually about finding a legal basis to restrict what I am, then we're done, and we'll let the prophet know that the ministry spent a Wednesday afternoon trying to legislate a 13-year-old who stopped a basilisk. Silence. Fudge looked like he'd swallowed his own lime green collar. Umbridge had gone through pink and come out the other side. Not, remarkably, looked like he was trying not to smile. Harry, beside Naruto, said very quietly, Hermione's notes. All 6 pages, Naruto murmured back. They left the ministry at noon. Not because the meeting was concluded to anyone's satisfaction, it wasn't, exactly, more that it had arrived at the specific stalemate that occurs when someone walks into a power negotiation and the other side discovers that what they'd classified as a manageable situation is not, and then everyone has to decide what to do with that information. Fudge shook their hands at the door with the energy of a man recalculating. Not walked them to the lifts and, at the last second, handed Naruto a small card. "My office contact," he said. "Directly. If you need, if the situation changes." He looked at Naruto with the specific expression of someone making a private decision in public. "Some of us at the ministry would like to be prepared." Naruto looked at the card. Looked at Not. "You believe us?" "I've been in this job 15 years, Not said. I've read every classified report about the First War. I believe you." He stepped back as the lift arrived. "Be careful this summer." The lift took them down and the atrium received them and they walked through it and back out into the gray July morning, and neither of them said anything for a moment, just walked, the street around them ordinary and magically unaware. Then Harry said, "Hermione is going to be insufferable about those notes." "Completely," Naruto agreed. "She deserves to be." "Completely." They walked. The morning opened up around them, the city going about its city business, and somewhere in the population around them was a world that didn't know any of the things they knew, and somewhere above them in a gray sky was weather that wasn't deciding anything yet. "He believed us," Harry said, "about Not." "Some of them do," Naruto said. "More than are saying so." He tucked the card into his jacket. "That's going to matter later." "How much later?" Naruto thought about Voldemort's wraith in the forest, about Tom Riddle's empty eyes in the chamber, about the diary with the Fong through it and the ink like blood. About the fragment Dumbledore had let slip in the hospital wing, there could be more of them. He thought about a chain of hidden pieces, a fractured soul spread across objects he didn't know yet, and the war behind all of it that was waiting in the future like weather, the kind of weather that's past deciding and only building. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we've got time to be ready." The letter from Dumbledore arrived 2 days later. It came by a large tawny owl that landed on the burrow's garden fence and waited with the patience of something that had been specifically instructed not to leave until acknowledged, and it was longer than Dumbledore's letters usually were. Naruto had received 3 of them, all characteristically brief and dense, the letters of a man who valued precision over volume. This one had more words, which told him something before he'd read a single one. Dumbledore wrote about the ministry meeting, which he knew about, which wasn't surprising. He wrote about his own concerns for the summer, careful language, the political landscape, the specific difficulty of preparing for a threat that the official position required treating as resolved. And then, at the end, in the handwriting of someone who has chosen to be direct after a long letter of being careful, "Naruto, I have been considering what you said in the corridor outside my office, about pieces of a fractured soul, about there being more than one. I believe you are correct. I have been investigating for some time. I would like to share what I know, and I believe you should know it too, not because it is your burden to carry, but because carrying it without knowing its full shape seems, at this point, both impractical and unfair. I will be in touch about a meeting before term begins. In the meantime, trust your instincts. They have, as far as I can tell, never been wrong." Harry read it over his shoulder. "He's going to tell us everything." "Not everything," Naruto said. "More than before." He folded the letter. "It's a start. Is that enough?" Naruto thought about what Snape had said in January of their first year, "Be careful, this year," and what Firenze had said in the forest, "What is coming will be sooner than the old man plans," and what Dumbledore had said in the corridor after the chamber, "I had not fully accounted for you." He thought about the chain of events that had been moving since before they were born, the shape of it, the long game inside it that Dumbledore was playing and that Voldemort was playing and that neither of them had expected someone to walk into from a completely different board. "It's what we have," he said. "We work with what we have." The Death Eaters came on a Thursday. They came in the afternoon, when the light was still full and the Burrow's garden was doing its summer thing, overgrown in the specific way of a garden that is loved but managed by people with other priorities, the gnomes active in the undergrowth, the sound of Percy's radio from his upstairs window. There were 5 of them, appearing in the lane that ran past the property in the coordinated way of people who had apparat to a rehearsed arrangement, in dark robes with their masks on, moving toward the burrow with the specific confidence of people who have looked at a target and made a decision about it and arrived to implement the decision. They were probably expecting the Weasleys. Or Harry Potter alone. What they were not expecting was Naruto standing in the garden. He'd been there for the past 20 minutes, in the garden, doing the thing he sometimes did, sitting in the dirt between the vegetable beds with his shoes off and his hands in the soil and his eyes closed, which the Weasleys had long since accepted as Naruto doing something they didn't have a classification for and which produced a better garden than most spells. He'd felt the apparition before it completed, the specific displacement of air, the 5 distinct points of arrival, the quality of intention that moved ahead of people who intend harm like a bow wave. He'd opened his eyes. He was standing up by the time the 5 figures came around the corner of the lane into the garden's sightline. Not hurrying. Not running. Just standing in the garden in his bare feet with the summer light on his hair and his hands loose at his sides, and the 5 Death Eaters stopped when they saw him. Not because of the wand, it was in his hand but not raised, held with the absence of urgency that was its own kind of statement. Not because of his size, he was 13, slight, demonstrably smaller than all 5 of them. They stopped because of the quality of the stillness he was standing in, and because the warmth in his chest had moved to the surface the moment the apparition completed and had stayed there, and the afternoon air around him was doing something, not dramatic, not visible, but perceptible, the way the air near a very large fire is perceptible before you can see any flame. One of the Death Eaters, tall, broad, moving with the ease of someone comfortable in violence, said, "Step aside, boy." "No," Naruto said. "Just no. Not I won't, or you'll have to go through me or any of the constructions that announce themselves as bravado. Just the flat fact of the thing. This isn't your business." "Everything here is my business," Naruto said. "These are my people." The 5 Death Eaters looked at each other with the communication of people who have a plan and have encountered an unanticipated variable and are deciding rapidly how the variable affects the plan. The calculation was visible, 5 trained adults, 1 child, and the calculation should have concluded quickly. It didn't conclude, because the warmth became heat. It came up the way it had in the chamber, in the forest, in the kitchen of number 4 Privet Drive a lifetime ago, not a surge, not a dramatic transformation, but a tide, rising from the deep place with the patient certainty of something that has been here since before this body was born and is entirely prepared to be here until this situation is resolved. The afternoon temperature climbed. The air above the garden shimmered slightly, not with visible chakra but with the quality of space near something enormous, the specific way proximity to something vast changes the atmosphere around it. The nearest Death Eater lifted his wand and cast. Naruto moved. He moved the way he'd moved in the chamber corridor when Quirrell's curse had come, not away, through. He went sideways under the line of the spell and was inside the man's reach in 2 strides, and put his palm flat on the center of the Death Eater's chest, and the heat that went through the contact point was not the aggressive heat of attack, it was the specific and total heat of something that will not be moved, and the man went back as though he'd walked into a wall he couldn't see, sprawling in the vegetable garden, wand flying, not injured but comprehensively stopped. The other 4 reacted. 2 of them cast simultaneously, which was trained coordination, and Naruto dropped to one knee and the spells crossed each other overhead and clashed in the way that magic clashes when 2 spells meet each other, bright and loud and dispersing into nothing. He was back up before the light had finished fading and moving toward them, not running but advancing at a pace that had no retreat in it, and the 2 who'd cast were backing up with the specific backpedaling of people whose opponent is doing something that isn't in their reference library. The back door of the burrow slammed open. Harry came through it at a run. Not panicked, moving, which was different, Harry having learned over 2 years the distinction between running from and running toward, and this was entirely toward. He had his wand out and his face set, and the specific quality of Harry at his best, frightened and present, the fear not eliminating the function but sharpening it. He cast without preamble, Expelliarmus, Harry's charm, the one he'd been told was too gentle for real combat and which he used anyway because he'd decided what his magic was for and stuck to that decision, and a Death Eater's wand went flying, and Harry caught it without looking, the Quidditch seeker catch, and the Death Eater was left wrong-footed and without their primary tool and considerably less confident about the mathematics. Ron came out behind Harry with his own wand up, and behind Ron came Arthur Weasley with the specific authority of a man who has just understood that something is happening in his garden and has arrived at the position that this is not acceptable. Arthur Weasley was not a combat wizard in the way that Aurors are combat wizards, but he was a man who loved his family with the specific depth of someone who has built the thing he loves himself from the ground up, and that love had, in this moment, the quality of infrastructure. The Death Eater Naruto had stopped was getting back up. Naruto looked at him. The man looked back, from the vegetable beds, mask slightly askew, and what was behind the mask's eyes was something Naruto had been watching in various forms all year, calculation meeting something that wouldn't calculate. "Stay down," Naruto said. The man stayed down. The other four had reorganized, two of them had Harry and Ron in their lines of sight, and the tactical shift was visible, moving from the unanticipated obstacle which was Naruto to the more predictable targets. This was the move of people who were trained and who were willing to let their training do the deciding when improvisation stopped working. Naruto felt the calculation happen and move before it completed. He stepped into the space between the Death Eaters and Harry with the completeness of someone stepping into a doorway, taking up all of it, filling it, the warmth at the absolute surface now, the air around him doing the shimmering thing, and Kurama, who had been watching this with the patience of something that has been through actual wars and knows the difference between urgency and emergency, came fully present. Not transformation. Not the physical manifestation of Nine Tails and Foxfire that lived in the fragments and the dream memories. Just presence. Just Kurama's full and ancient consciousness sitting at the surface of Naruto's skin and looking at 5 Death Eaters with the comprehensive assessment of something that has existed since the world was less organized than it currently is and has not been impressed by what the world has organized itself into. The air pressure in the garden dropped. A sound, not a sound, the physical experience of a very low frequency without an audible component, moved outward from the center of Naruto's chest in a radius that crossed the garden in a second and hit all 5 Death Eaters at once. The one who'd gone down stayed down. One of the standing 4 dropped their wand without deciding to. 2 of them took steps backward, the involuntary steps of something the body does without consulting the mind when the mind's assessment of a situation has missed something essential that the body, which is older, has caught. The last one, the tall broad one who'd spoken first, who had the quality of someone who had done this many times and had calibrated their own fear carefully enough to manage it in most situations, looked at Naruto across the garden, and looked at what was in the air around him, and the calibration failed. Not a full failure. Not crumbling. But the specific failure that happens when a well-maintained system encounters input it was not built to process. "What," said the broad Death Eater, quietly, to no one in particular, "is that?" Naruto looked at him steadily. The warmth was enormous and entirely calm, the way deep water is enormous and calm, not peaceful, not gentle, but stable in its depth, stable in the way that things are stable when they don't have to prove anything because what they are is self-evident. "Something you've never met before," Naruto said. "And something I'd recommend not meeting again." In the distance, apparition cracks, rapid, the sound of Ministry apparition protocols rather than independent. Someone had triggered something. Or Dumbledore had been watching. Or both. The broad Death Eater looked at the cracks. Looked at Naruto. Did the mathematics of the current situation, which now included Ministry arrival and one child who had just done things to 4 trained adult wizards with his hands, and made a decision. He disapparated. The others followed, the fallen one getting up first, moving fastest, the urgency of retreat having apparently clarified the situation in a way that the opening of the encounter hadn't. 3 cracks, 4, 5, and the garden was just the garden, overturned vegetable beds, 1 displaced gnome staring from the undergrowth, the summer afternoon resuming its ordinary temperature. 3 Ministry Aurors appeared at the lane entrance, wands drawn, eyes moving over the garden with rapid professional assessment. They looked at the Weasleys. They looked at Harry. They looked at Naruto, who was standing in the center of the garden with his bare feet in the disturbed earth and his wand still in his hand, the heat dissipating around him, Kurama settling back to depth with the satisfaction of something that has been seen clearly and found exactly as large as it is. One of the Aurors, senior, dark-skinned, with the quality of someone who has been in actual combat and knows the difference between the story and the thing, looked at Naruto for a long moment. 5 of them, she said. 5, Naruto confirmed. You held 5 Death Eaters in a garden. Harry disarmed one, Naruto said. Arthur was here. Ron. He looked at them, the specific look that gave credit where credit was real. I wasn't alone. The Auror looked at him with the expression of someone who is going to be thinking about this conversation for a significant time. No, she said. But you were first. She said this like she was filing it, the way Not had filed things, not for a report, for something else. The kind of information that sits in a person and does work over time. The burrow sorted itself out over the next 2 hours, Auror's statements, Molly's response, which was enormous and fierce and directed first at the general situation and then at Percy for not having noticed anything from his window and then at herself for not having better wards, and which resolved into the specific warmth of someone who has almost lost something and is responding to that almost with as much love as she can produce, and she can produce considerable amounts. She held Harry first. Harry let her. He had the expression of someone who knew what a mother felt like now from the inside and was learning it as a thing that was his to have, not a thing that happened to other people. She held Naruto second, and Naruto, who had spent 13 years managing on his own resources, who had been solid for Harry and solid for all of them and who had stood in a garden against 5 adults with his feet in the dirt and not moved, went very still in her arms and then put his head down slightly into her shoulder, just for a moment, just long enough. Good boy, Molly said. Fiercely. Completely. Both of you. Good boys. Arthur sat at the kitchen table afterward with a cup of tea that was cooling untouched in front of him and said, quietly, to Naruto, you knew they were coming before they appeared. Yes. How far in advance? A few seconds. Long enough. Arthur looked at his tea. Could that be trained? Extended? In theory. Naruto understood what Arthur was actually asking, whether what he could do was something that could be used, practically, in a world that was moving towards something, whether the thing in his chest could be a warning system, a resource. He thought about Not's card in his jacket. About Dumbledore's letter. About the ministry meeting and the 5 Death Eaters in the garden and the shape of what was building in the distance. In theory, Naruto said. Given time. Arthur nodded, the nod of a man adding information to a private calculation about what was coming and what would be needed when it arrived. Then we have work to do, he said, quietly. Not afraid. Not resigned. The voice of someone choosing to be useful rather than overwhelmed by what they're choosing to be useful against. The kitchen was warm. The gnomes were audible in the garden. Outside the window the afternoon had decided to be ordinary again, which was the afternoon's prerogative and which nobody held against it. Harry found him at the end of the garden, later, sitting on the fence where the Weasley property met the lane with his feet dangling and his face turned toward the field beyond. The light was going gold and long, the best part of the summer day, the part that made things look like they were worth something, which they were, but the light reminded you. Harry sat beside him on the fence. Their shoulders touched. They sat in the way they'd been sitting next to each other since they were small enough to fit on a single cot in a cupboard under the stairs, the specific proximity of 2 people for whom the other person's presence is the fundamental coordinate around which everything else is located. You all right? Harry said. Yeah. And he was, genuinely, not management. The warmth in his chest was deep and settled, Kurama content in the specific dignified way of something that had done the thing it was there to do and found the doing sufficient. You. My hands are still shaking a little, Harry said, and showed them, the slight tremor. Not from fear. Just after. Adrenaline, Naruto said. It takes a minute. You don't shake. I shake later. When I'm alone. He said this without embarrassment, because it was true and because Harry deserved the true version. I process differently. Doesn't mean I'm not affected. Harry was quiet, the good kind of quiet that he'd gotten better at, comfortable, thinking, not needing to fill. The field beyond the fence was doing the summer field thing, grass moving slightly in the evening air, birds doing the bird things. 5 of them, Harry said. Yeah. And they ran. Yeah. Harry looked at the field. I keep thinking about what's coming. What it's actually going to, he paused. Not the theory of it. Voldemort's been theory for 2 years, more or less. But today was real. 5 people in Weasley's garden who wanted to hurt someone. He was quiet. That's what it's going to be like. Except more. More, Naruto agreed. And more organized. And for longer. But we've been through 2 years of more. We have. Naruto looked at his brother. And we're better for it. Both of us. All of us. Harry thought about this. Hermione's going to be furious she wasn't here. She's going to be furious at every piece of information she didn't have. She'll redirect it into preparation, and the preparation will be extraordinary, and in 6 months it'll have saved someone's life. He said it with the certainty of someone who knows Hermione well enough to project her forward. And Ron's going to tell the story of the disarm to everyone in the burrow, in increasingly vivid versions. He caught them off guard with the wand disarm, Harry said, with the loyal slightly defensive tone. It worked because they didn't expect it. It worked because he did it without hesitating, Naruto said. Which is the same thing it's always been with Ron. He does the thing when the thing needs doing. He just doesn't always know that about himself. A pause. He will. Give him time. Harry smiled, slowly, at the field. The smile was, settled, Naruto thought. Harry's smile had been finding this quality over 2 years, the quality of something that knew itself, that occupied its own face without apology. What do you think it is? Harry said. The actual end of it. If there is one. Voldemort's soul is fractured, Naruto said. Pieces of it, hidden in objects. He can't die while the pieces exist. So the end is finding the pieces and destroying them, and then, whoever's at the front when the last piece goes. Harry looked at him. The unspoken thing in the look was the prophecy, which Naruto knew about from Dumbledore's letter, which Harry had been turning over for weeks. Neither can live while the other survives. Harry's specific weight to carry. The prophecy doesn't say anything about you, Harry said. No, Naruto agreed. But you're going to be there anyway. Obviously. The prophecy, if it's accurate, means I have to be the one too, then you'll be the one, Naruto said. I'll make sure everything else is handled so that you can be. He said this without drama, without the weight of martyrdom or heroic sacrifice. Just the clean practicality of someone who knows the geometry of a situation and has decided what role they play in it. That's what I'm for. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Then, roughly, that's a lot too. It's not a burden, Naruto said. It's what I choose. There's a difference. He looked at Harry steadily. You know the difference. You've always known it. Harry looked back. The scar on his forehead caught the gold light, just a mark, just a fact about him, just the shape of something that had happened and which he was learning to be larger than. His eyes were steady and complicated and entirely his own, not the eyes of the boy in the cupboard under the stairs who'd learned to apologize for existing. Yeah, Harry said. I do. They sat on the fence as the light went gold and then amber and then the particular blue of a summer evening that hasn't decided to be dark yet, the burrow warm behind them, the field open ahead of them, the future somewhere in that field doing its patient thing, waiting, building, neither hurrying nor delaying, just accumulating toward the moment when it would become present. In Naruto's chest, Kurama was warm. Not dormant, not silent, present, attending, the vast and ancient consciousness of something that had crossed an impossible distance to be exactly here, exactly now, in the chest of a boy sitting on a garden fence in England watching the evening come in. Not because it had to. Because it had chosen. Because the kid had reached first, in the dark, in a place between lives, with hands that couldn't hold anything yet, and said without words, "Here. You're not alone. I've got you." And the old fox, who had been alone for a very long time and had decided that this was simply what alone meant, the old fox had felt the reaching, and had made its own decision, quietly, irrevocably, and had never unmade it in any of the years since. "We've got a lot of work to do," Kurama said, in no language, in the language they'd invented between them. "I know," Naruto said back. "Good." A pause with warmth in it, the specific warmth of something enormous choosing, very deliberately, to be gentle. "Then let's get to it." Naruto looked at his brother beside him, and at the field ahead of them, and at the evening doing its slow arriving thing, and felt what he felt every time he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not peace, not comfort, those were things for after, but rightness. The rightness of someone who knows what they are and who they're for and what the road ahead asks of them, and has said yes to all of it without condition. He jumped off the fence. "Come on," he said. "Molly's making dinner and I'm actually starving." Harry laughed, the full one, the one with no performance in it, and jumped off the fence beside him, and they walked back toward the light of the burrow through the gold last hour of the summer day, their footsteps in the grass, the gnomes retreating, the evening coming on behind them. The story wasn't finished. It was, in every way that mattered, just beginning.